Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
The night was unnervingly silent when Nora Reynolds first heard the whispers in the dark. It was a cold, brittle autumn evening in the small town of Marrow's End, where the trees seemed to carry secrets from centuries long past. Nora, a single mother newly relocated to a creaking Victorian house on the outskirts of town, had come in search of solace and a fresh start after years of heartache. She didn't expect that her new refuge would harbor the ghosts of sorrow and terror that had haunted the landscape for generations. The house had a reputation, though few in Marrow's End would speak it aloud. Rumors whispered about strange occurrences, flickering lights in the dead hours of the night, unexplained knocks at the door, and voices that muttered in the deep, ancient accent of those who had long passed from the world. Nora dismissed these as superstitions until the night the whispers became clear. At exactly 2:17 a.m., as Nora lay in bed, a soft voice called her name from the darkened corridor. "Nora, come!" The tone was sorrowful yet insistent, and it vibrated with the same timbre as the lullabies her mother used to sing. Heart pounding, Nora pulled on a robe and crept toward the source of the sound. As she moved through the hallway, the murmur swelled into a chorus of disembodied voices, each one telling fragments of twisted stories. The voices became clearer near the grand, decaying staircase that led to the attic, a place Nora had purposely avoided since she first saw the grim portraits of the previous owners. At the base of the staircase, a faded photograph of a family caught her eye. The family was smiling, but their eyes held a deep sadness. In that moment, an icy chill swept over her. The air around her was suddenly thick, as if she were wading through unseen fog. "Help us," the voices pleaded. "He's back. The curse isn't over." With trembling hands and a racing heart, Nora ascended the stairs, compelled by a mixture of dread and an unexplainable urge to listen to the ancient sorrow of her new home. The attic was draped in murky shadows, and every step echoed ominously. In the center of the room lay a pile of old belongings, draped in dusty white sheets. Among them, a battered wooden box emitted a faint glow. With a deep breath, Nora slowly lifted the lid. Inside, instead of trinkets, was a collection of diaries and letters, yellowed with age and filled with cryptic accounts of unspeakable events. Her eyes fell upon an entry dated 1897, and in a trembling voice to herself, she read, "The spirits have been disturbed. The darkness that once slumbered in our blood now awakens. Tonight, the boundary between life and death thins, and the damned walk among us." The words sent a shock through her body. Before she could process the diary's contents any further, the temperature dropped dramatically, and a cold wind swept through the attic despite no apparent source. The voices intensified, harmonizing into a ghastly dirge. "You belong to us," they chanted, and in a flash, a spectral figure manifested in the corner of the room. Dressed in tattered Victorian garb, the apparition's hollow eyes fixated on Nora. Its presence was both sorrowful and predatory, a harbinger of the untold horrors that lay beneath the veneer of the old house. "Who are you?" Nora asked, voice quivering as she faced the restless spirit. The figure responded in a raspy whisper that reverberated through the cold chamber. "I am Elias, guardian of the souls trapped by the curse. You have awakened the slumbering malice that festers here. Now our story intertwines with yours, for you must bear witness to our suffering and perhaps find release for us all." Even as these words hung in the air, the spirit faded, leaving Nora alone with her pounding heart and the echoes of despair. In the following days, Nora attempted to resume her daily life, but the house was not content to let her forget the horror of that night. The apparitions grew bolder, appearing in reflections on rain-soaked windows and in the corners of vision in the dead of night. One evening, after tucking her young son, Liam, into bed, Nora found a note slipped under the door of her room. Written in spidery handwriting, it read simply, "They are coming for you." That night, the muffled sounds of footsteps and low murmurs disturbed the stillness of her home. With Liam safely asleep in his room, she ventured into the hallway, only to find shadows writhing along the walls as if alive. Determined to understand the malevolent forces within the house, Nora sought out the town's resident historian, Mr. Abernathy. A man with a hunched back and deeply furrowed brows, he had spent decades collecting fragments of Merrow's End's grim past. In his dimly lit study, where ancient manuscripts and brittle newspapers were piled high, Nora carefully explained her experiences. Mr. Abernathy's face drained of color as he recounted the dreadful history of the house, a place built on cursed ground and the site of a series of gruesome events that seemed to repeat every generation. You see, Mr. Abernathy began, his voice almost a whisper, as if too loud a tone might disturb the lingering specters. This land has been a repository of despair since the early days of settlement. The original family who lived in this house was haunted by madness. Their daughter Annabelle possessed a chilling connection with the spirit world. She was said to converse with entities from beyond, the ones that would eventually condemn the entire family. The legacy of their torment was passed down through the ages. The curse is tied to the land, to the restless souls and the blood spilled upon it. You, Nora, have become the next keeper of their burden. Nora felt a creeping dread as Mr. Abernathy's words echoed in her mind. That night, as the wind howled like the cries of the damned, she found herself lying awake with Liam sleeping in the next room. In the silence of midnight, the house seemed to breathe, each creak of the floorboards punctuating her anxiety. At times, the voices drifted through the corridors like a gentle, insidious lullaby that lulled her into uneasy dreams. In one particularly haunting vision, Nora saw Elias standing at the foot of Liam's bed, his sorrowful eyes fixated on the child. Elias whispered, "He is not yours to protect. The curse will claim what is rightfully its own." Nora woke with a start, drenched in cold sweat and trembling, as she listened to the soft, almost lullaby-like hum of agony emanating from deep within the walls of the house. As the days progressed, Nora found herself grappling with the duality of her new life. Daytime provided a semblance of normalcy, while nightfall unleashed horrors that blurred the line between nightmare and reality. One particularly dismal evening, while sorting through the diaries in the attic, she encountered another entry. This one a desperate farewell penned by the original mistress of the house. The writing was frantic, the ink smeared as if the writer had been in the grip of terror. "Do not trust the shadows. They hunger for the living, for those who bear the innocent light. I have lost everything to the curse, the laughter of my children, the warmth of my husband. Soon the darkness will reclaim the souls of Merrow's End." Deeply moved and terrified in equal measure, Nora resolved to confront the curse head-on. She began to research ancient rites and incantations, poring over dusty texts borrowed from Mr. Abernathy's vast collection. Nights were spent reciting cryptic passages in trembling voices, her words echoing through the desolate halls in the hope of banishing the malignant force that had invaded her life. Yet, every attempt seemed to provoke more fury from the unseen presence. The spirits responded by intensifying their manifestations. Doors slammed unbidden, mirrors shattered without cause, and ghastly apparitions roamed the corridors. One night, as she chanted in the flickering candlelight in her living room, Liam awoke with a scream. Rushing to his room, Nora found him cowering under the bed, eyes wide with terror, whispering, "Mama, the man in the mirror, he's coming for me." The terror in his voice was unmistakable, and Nora's heart sank as she realized that the curse was now ensnaring all who resided within the cursed walls. Desperation drove her to the local priest, Father Dorian, a man reputed for his unorthodox methods and an unwavering belief in exorcism. In the cold, stone-ceilinged sanctuary of the town's derelict church, Nora recounted her harrowing experiences. Father Dorian listened intently, his lined face solemn as he clenched his hands around a rosary. "My dear child," he murmured, "the darkness that grips your home is not merely a specter from the other side. It is a manifestation of the deepest grief and hatred left behind by a soul betrayed by life. To exorcise it, you must not only command it, but understand its origin." That evening, under a moonless sky, Father Dorian accompanied Nora back to her home. Armed with relics, prayers, and unwavering faith, they entered the mansion with cautious determination. The atmosphere was stifling, a palpable weight of malevolence that pressed on their chests. Father Dorian began an incantation that resonated in the shadowy corridors, a litany of ancient words that seemed to challenge the very fabric of the curse. As his voice reached a crescendo, the The shadows convulsed violently, and a horrendous wail filled the house, a sound reminiscent of 1,000 tormented souls crying out in agony. A sudden flash of spectral light illuminated the room, and in that moment, Nora caught sight of a figure even more dreadful than Elias, a gaunt, deformed man with hollow eyes and a twisted grin that mocked every hope of salvation. "Your faith is futile," the entity hissed, its voice a discordant clash of bitterness and despair. "You cannot banish what is inevitable. We are bound here by the sins of the past, and our curse will outlast your mortal contrivances." With each word, the house shuddered as if in response to the demon's declaration. Father Dorian's voice wavered, but he persisted, his prayers clashing with the entity's malevolence. Amid the spectral chaos, Nora's mind raced back to the diaries and the desperate notes left by those who had once suffered in silence. Summoning all her courage, she stepped forward into the eye of the storm, her voice joining the prayer in a steady, resilient cadence. "I do not fear you," she declared, her words reverberating with a defiant strength that seemed to momentarily still the spectral barrage. "Your cruelty was born of betrayal, but I embrace the light you have long denied. Begone!" For an agonizing moment, the entity's grin faltered, and the oppressive darkness that shrouded the room weakened. The combined force of Father Dorian's prayers and Nora's impassioned defiance created a fissure in the malignant energy, a temporary respite that felt almost like hope. Yet, even as the specter recoiled, the whispers persisted, bouncing off the walls and murmuring of unfinished business and eternal sorrow. In the days that followed, despite their valiant efforts, the oppressive atmosphere in the house grew ever more claustrophobic. It seemed that every ritual, every desperate plea, only stoked the fires of the curse that had been fed by centuries of despair. Liam, no longer able to sleep, began scribbling frantic drawings on scraps of paper, images of faceless figures and twisted landscapes that defied explanation. One drawing in particular sent shivers down Nora's spine. It depicted a spectral figure standing at the window, its eyes voids of desolation, with the words, "The dark takes all," scrawled below. Late one stormy night, as rain battered the windows and lightning carved sinister silhouettes across the walls, Nora awoke to a sound that froze her blood, a door creaking open as if pushed by unseen hands. Heart pounding, she crept down the hall, each step a battle against the rising tide of terror. Reaching Liam's room, she found the child missing, his bed neatly made as if he had never been there. Panic clawed at her throat as she scanned every shadowed corner of the house. A soft, eerie lullaby drifted from the attic, beckoning her upward. With dread knotting in her stomach, Nora ascended the staircase once more. In the attic, among the relics of despair, she found Liam standing silently near a large, cracked mirror. His eyes were glassy and fixed, and his expression was blank, as though entranced by an unseen presence. Before she could reach him, a cold, spectral hand brushed against her shoulder. Spinning around, she faced a figure cloaked in darkness, the twisted visage of the malefic entity she had seen during Father Dorian's exorcism. It was as if every nightmare had converged into a single malevolent being. "Your love will not save you," it whispered in a voice that grated against her soul. "He is ours now." Nora clutched Liam tightly, her voice defiant amid the terror. "I will never let you take him," she screamed. But the entity's laughter echoed around them, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the old house. In that heart-stopping moment, the mirror behind the entity shimmered, and within its depths, Nora saw images of countless souls, victims of the curse, their faces twisted with despair, reaching out as if begging for deliverance. The realization struck her like a jolt of lightning. The curse was not just a malevolent force, but a vast network of sorrow and injustice built upon the lives of those it had destroyed. Each generation had added to its power, each victim a piece of its dark mosaic. Determined to break this cycle of torment, Nora resolved that her fight was not solely for herself or for Liam, it was for all those silenced by the curse. Clinging to the ancient diaries and with Father Dorian's words echoing in her mind, she began a new ritual, this time drawing upon the collective grief and hope of every soul that had suffered within these walls. With trembling hands and a voice that wavered between despair and defiance, she chanted an incantation of remembrance and release, a litany that asked the spirits to find peace and for the curse to be undone through the power of compassion and truth. As her voice filled the attic, the oppressive air began to tremble. The spectral figure advanced, its eyes blazing with an intensity that was both furious and sorrowful. "You dare challenge centuries of anguish with mere words?" it hissed. In response, Nora's eyes filled with tears, but her determination remained unbroken. "I dare," she whispered, her voice trembling yet resolute. "I dare to acknowledge your pain and implore you to let go of the chains of the past. Your torment does not have to be eternal." For what felt like an eternity, time slowed as the forces of darkness and the light of healing clashed in that cramped, dusty space. The mirror behind them began to shatter, releasing a cascade of images, a torrent of memories and voices crying out in both anguish and relief. Slowly, miraculously, the malevolent figure began to fade, its form dissolving into wisps of ephemeral shadow. The overwhelming wail of the cursed souls softened into a quiet, collective sigh, as though centuries of sorrow were finally finding solace in the act of remembrance. Outside, the first hints of dawn broke over Marrow's End, casting a pale glow through the attic's grimy windows. The oppressive weight that had filled the house for so long felt lighter, as if the darkness, now exorcised by compassion and understanding, was retreating into the crevices of history. Father Dorian, who had remained on the ground floor throughout the ordeal, emerged cautiously, his face etched with exhaustion and relief. "You did it, Nora," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "You have given them a chance to rest." In the quiet aftermath of the harrowing night, Nora cradled Liam in her arms as the house slowly began to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Yet, the memory of that night would remain etched in every creak of the wooden floorboards, every whisper of wind that rustled through the broken trees outside. The diaries and letters were carefully sealed away in a new box, destined for safekeeping in the town's historical archives, a reminder of the darkness that once prevailed and the courage it took to overcome it. Over time, the people of Marrow's End noticed a subtle transformation in the old Victorian house. The oppressive aura gave way to a strange tranquility, as if the sorrowful souls had finally found a measure of peace. Nora became a quiet guardian of that peace, her nights still occasionally punctuated by distant echoes from the past, yet no longer filled with paralyzing terror. Instead, they reminded her of the power of compassion and the strength that lies in confronting the darkness, both around and within oneself. The scar left by that long, dreadful night never entirely vanished. There remained a part of her that was forever intertwined with the pain and the mystery of the curse. On stormy evenings, when the wind howled a mournful tune and the raindrops tapped irregular patterns against the windows, Nora would sometimes catch a glimpse of a familiar shape in the distance, a ghostly figure watching from the edge of the light, a reminder that the past, however tragic, was an inseparable part of the journey to healing. One particularly reflective evening, while sitting on the creaking porch with Liam playing quietly nearby, Nora found solace in the simple rhythms of everyday life. Yet, as the shadows lengthened and the first stars appeared in the clear night sky, she paused to listen. In the whisper of the wind, she heard not a cry of anguish, but a soft, almost tender lullaby, a final farewell from the souls whose stories had been so cruelly intertwined with her own. "Rest now," the voices seemed to say, "for all is forgiven." That night, as Nora lay down to sleep with the gentle cadence of the wind and rain as her lullaby, she no longer dreaded the darkness. She had forged a fragile truce with the spectral remnants of the past, and in doing so had discovered that even the deepest horrors could be softened by the light of understanding and the strength of a resolute heart. In the silent, watchful dark, the ghosts of Marrow's End finally faded into the mists of time, a quiet testament to the power of love and the relentless human spirit that can never truly be vanquished.
Story number 2.
The rain began as a whisper before it turned into a relentless torrent that battered the cracked pavement of the long-forgotten country road. In the depth of night, under a bruised, clouded sky, Mason Carver drove his aging sedan toward Crescent Memorial, a derelict hospital whose crumbling facade had loomed over the small town of Blackwood for generations. The locals rarely spoke of the place, and when they did, it was with hushed voices steeped in dread. Mason, a determined yet skeptical journalist, was drawn by stories of inexplicable disappearances and sinister legends whispered about the institution. Determined to unravel the truth, he parked his car beneath a skeletal oak and stepped into the downpour, his flashlight slicing through the darkness as he approached the looming structure. The hospital's entrance was a grotesque portal into another world. Rusted, metal doors hung crookedly, half ripped away by time, and the heavy air carried a pungent odor of decay and dampness. Mason paused before pushing the doors open. "Hello?" he called into the void, his voice shaking slightly. The echo that returned was an unsettling mockery of a greeting, as if the building itself was alive and amused by his intrusion. Inside, the corridor stretched into an endless labyrinth of dark hallways. The peeling wallpaper revealed layers of history, stories written in the scars of the walls, each flake hinting at a once-forgotten agony. As Mason's footfalls echoed, the sound was quickly swallowed by an oppressive silence. Every step deepened his trepidation, yet his resolve burned like a fragile light amid the consuming dark. In the center of the foyer lay remnants of medical equipment, rusted gurneys and broken devices scattered as if abandoned in haste. Soon he discovered an old signboard etched with faded lettering, Crescent Memorial Hospital, dedicated to healing. The irony was not lost on him. A chill slid down his spine as he recalled fragments of local lore, tales of patients who never left, and doctors who whispered of unauthorized experiments in the deepest recesses of the building. Mason's breath hitched when he noticed a trail of muddy footprints leading away from the entrance deeper into the complex. Swallowing his fear, he followed them. The footprints led to a cramped corridor that ended at a heavy oak door, its surface marred with scratches and peculiar symbols that he did not recognize. His heart pounding, Mason pushed the door open and entered what appeared to be a makeshift ward. Rusty beds lay in disarray, and stained linens clung desperately to the metal frames. In one corner, an old wheelchair sat abandoned beside a dusty potted plant. As Mason stepped inside, the door creaked and slammed shut behind him, plunging the room into a near-total darkness, broken only by the feeble beam of his flashlight. Then, without warning, a slow, ragged breathing filled the space. Mason spun around, trying to locate the source of the sound. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, and his skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. A voice, barely a murmur but unmistakably present, whispered, "You should not have come." It was a tone of sorrow and menace intertwined. Mason's rational mind screamed that it was his imagination, yet the emotional intensity behind the voice was undeniable. "Who are you?" Mason managed to croak. The room remained silent for a heartbeat before another voice, this one softer and cracking with despair, responded, "I am the lost. We remain." The words, like fragments of a broken promise, sent dread surging through his veins. Every instinct urged him to run, but his journalist's curiosity rooted him to the spot. He began scribbling notes feverishly, detailing every abnormal occurrence and emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Venturing further into the ward, Mason discovered a battered diary wedged behind a rusted filing cabinet. Its cover was blackened and brittle with age. Hesitating only a moment, he flipped it open and began reading the frantic script. The diary belonged to a nurse named Eleanor, her words a raw confession of horrors that haunted the halls of Crescent Memorial. Eleanor had chronicled the cruel experiments conducted on the vulnerable, the isolation imposed on patients in a desperate bid to contain something unspeakable. One entry read, "Tonight, I witnessed the impossible." The patients, once despondent and broken, rose in unison. Their eyes shone with a maddening luminescence as they chanted in a language older than our sins. The doctor's cold, calculating laugh echoed through the halls as if it belonged to another realm. I fear that whatever force we inadvertently unleashed in this forsaken place now haunts every corner. We are all prisoners of an eternal night. A heavy silence gripped Mason as he closed the diary, its revelations twisting his perception of reality. Was he witnessing the remnants of a tortured past, or had something malevolent been waiting, lurking in the very walls of the hospital? At that moment, a scraping noise emanated from the far end of the ward. Mason's flashlight beam trembled as he aimed it toward the sound. Emerging from the shadows was a spectral figure, a woman in a faded nurse's uniform, her eyes sunken and her face contorted in sorrowful agony. "They took him," she murmured, her voice echoing with endless regret. "They took him, and now he is lost to us all." Her spectral eyes seemed to plead for help, but behind her, a tall figure in a dark coat stood motionless, his presence radiating a cold, unyielding malice. "Who are you?" Mason demanded, raising his voice despite the terror that tightened its grip. The tall figure's reply was a slow, measured chuckle that reverberated with a chilling finality. "I am the keeper of this pain," he said, his tone hypnotic yet brutal. "These halls remember every moment of suffering, and now they remember you." His eyes, dark and bottomless, locked onto Mason's as if stripping away every pretense of courage. The nurse faded into the background, leaving Mason alone with this new, ominous presence. Mason's mind raced as memories of local legends flooded back. The keeper, known in whispered circles as Dr. Blackwood, had once been the head physician at Crescent Memorial. Rumors said he conducted forbidden experiments, seeking to merge the living and the dead, striving to conquer mortality. Yet his ambitions turned the hospital into a crucible of unspeakable torment. The spectral witness before him seemed a remnant of that sinister chapter, a guardian of curses unleashed long ago. Desperation overrode caution as Mason tried to bargain, voice cracking. "What do you want from me? I'm here only to understand." Dr. Blackwood's grin widened into a grotesque smile, his pale face contorting with amusement and cruelty. "Understanding comes at a price," he intoned. "You will witness truth beyond mortal comprehension, and in doing so, you shall become a part of our legacy." In that instant, the corridor behind Mason convulsed with the sound of soft weeping and distant screams. Shadows stretched and contorted along the walls as if reaching out to ensnare him. The floor beneath his feet seemed to tremble, and he lost the illusion of solid ground. Mason's rational mind began to crumble under the onslaught of terror as he realized that every step he took within these haunted walls was a descent into madness. Clutching the diary as if it were a talisman, Mason forced himself onward. "No price is too high for the truth," he declared, his voice shaking but resolute. "I must uncover what happened here." His words echoed hollowly, swallowed up by the oppressive gloom, and he moved toward a narrow stairwell that led to the lower levels of the hospital. Down in the bowels of Crescent Memorial, the air was even colder, heavy with the stench of rotting fabric and forgotten sins. The stairwell was narrow, barely lit by the erratic beam of his flashlight as he climbed down into what appeared to be an underground morgue. Cold metal tables were scattered haphazardly, and frozen blocks of what might have once been organs glistened like macabre trophies in the intermittent light. It was here that Mason found clues to the true horror of the hospital, a series of photographs pinned to a corkboard depicting smiling patients and their families, each scene marred by a crudely scrawled note. "Taken by Blackwood, no return." A sudden clamor in the background made Mason spin around. From behind a steel door, voices erupted, muted at first, then growing louder in a chorus of despair and malice. Mason approached the door with trembling determination and slowly pushed it open. The room beyond was cluttered with archaic medical instruments and an eerie collection of personal effects. In the center of the room was a large circular mirror that reflected not only his own weary face, but also a parade of spectral figures standing behind him. Their expressions were anguished, haunted by memories of suffering that defied the boundaries of time. One of the apparitions, a young man in tattered clothes with eyes full of terror, stepped forward. "Help us," he pleaded, his voice soft yet insistent. "We cannot escape, trapped by his will. Every night he walks these halls, collecting souls for his dark experiments." The message was clear. Dr. Blackwood's malevolent influence had not receded. It had grown stronger, feeding on the sorrow and agony of those who remained confined within the hospital's decaying walls. Just then, a force shattered the stifling silence. The mirror exploded inward with a cascade of shattered glass and screaming faces. Mason staggered back as shards flew past him like deadly raindrops. Through the haze of glass and broken dreams emerged Dr. Blackwood himself, his form distorted and his eyes blazing with a supernatural light. "You should have left while you still had the chance," he sneered, his voice rising above the cacophony of despair. "Now, you are bound to our fate." Desperate and terrified, Mason scrambled for an exit, but every path appeared to twist back upon itself like the maddening corridors of a nightmare. He could feel the spectral hands of the damned reaching for him, each clammy touch sapping the very essence of his will to live. The ground beneath him pulsed as if alive, resonating with the heartbeat of the cursed souls. Dr. Blackwood advanced slowly, his every word a claw scraping at the barriers of sanity. "Your curiosity has made you one of us," he hissed. You will never leave these halls. The truth you sought will be your eternal torment." In a moment of frenzied clarity, Mason recalled Eleanor's diary and the desperate determination etched within its lines. Fighting back a rising tide of despair, he shouted, "I will not be a prisoner of this suffering. I will tell your story, expose your sins to the world, even if it means becoming part of it." His voice echoed as an act of defiance against the overwhelming darkness. For a heartbeat, the oppressive force in the room seemed to waver, the spectral figures pausing in their relentless approach. But defiance, in this place, came at an excruciating cost. As Mason spoke, the mirror's fragments coalesced into a swirling vortex of light and shadow. Within that vortex, he saw visions of life, once filled with hope, now twisted into unbearable horror. The faces of the victims stared back at him with eyes full of silent accusation. Amid the overwhelming terror, Mason felt a deep and piercing sorrow for these trapped souls and for the legacy of suffering that Dr. Blackwood had created. With a final surge of will, Mason lunged toward the mirror, determined to shatter the cycle and release the souls ensnared by the curse. The glass yielded under the force of his desperation, splintering with a sound that resonated like a death knell through the corridors of the hospital. As the shards of glass fell away, so too did the heavy hold of darkness. The apparitions stirred, and one by one they began to fade into the ether with whispered thanks. Free at last, they murmured, their voices mingling with the fading echoes of Dr. Blackwood's curses. For a fleeting moment, the oppressive gloom lifted, replaced by the fragile light of hope, a hope Mason clung to as he made his way back toward the exit. Yet, even as he stumbled out into the rain-soaked night, the experience left an indelible mark on his soul. The legacy of Crescent Memorial and the tormented spirit of Dr. Blackwood would forever be etched in his memories as a dire reminder of the darkness that festered behind human ambition and cruelty. Back in the small town of Blackwood, Mason's story spread like wildfire. Many dismissed it as the ramblings of a man haunted by his own doubts, while others whispered of it in solemn corners, wary of invoking the same dark forces that had once held captive so many. Mason published his account, a detailed chronicle of his descent into the heart of despair. And though he achieved acclaim as a fearless exposer of hidden horrors, every night as he lay in bed, Mason would awaken to the residual echoes of the hospital, those soft, accusatory whispers reminding him of the price of seeking forbidden truths. In his dreams, the spectral figures returned, not as vengeful wraiths, but as gentle shadows seeking closure. And sometimes, in the dead of night, Mason would hear a faint voice carrying on the wind, saying, "Remember us, and in doing so, grant us peace." The voice was a lullaby of regret and redemption, urging him to honor the fallen souls by never forgetting the darkness that dwelled in forgotten corners of the world. Thus, every now and then when the wind howled outside his window or the rain tapped a sorrowful rhythm on the roof, Mason would pause, remembering the night he challenged the eternal curse of Crescent Memorial Hospital, and with a heavy heart, he would whisper a prayer for those lost in perpetual torment, a promise that their stories, their sufferings, and their fight for liberation would be carried on by those brave enough to seek the truth.
Story number 3.
A biting chill permeated the air the moment Amelia drove down the lonely, winding road that led to Whispering Pines Motel. It was a night smothered in thick fog, the kind that blurred the contours of distant trees into twisted silhouettes. The neon sign of the motel buzzed erratically in the darkness, its light reflecting off puddles from a recent rain. Amelia, a weary traveler with a cautious heart and a past riddled with unexplained nightmares, had been drawn to this isolated refuge by a mixture of necessity and the promise of a brief escape from her relentless insomnia. As she parked the car in the overgrown lot, a strange sense of foreboding tugged at her. The motel, once a thriving waypoint for road-weary commuters, now stood as a ghostly relic of forgotten days. The faded facade, marked by peeling paint and a single, sagging awning, gave the impression that time had abandoned the place long ago. Even the wind seemed to whisper as it stirred the dead leaves cluttering the pavement. Inside the lobby, the scent of stale air and a hint of something metallic assaulted her senses. The reception desk was manned by a gaunt man with deep-set eyes who offered a barely perceptible smile. "Welcome to Whispering Pines Motel," he said in a voice that was both soft and unsettling. "Your room is ready. Number 7. Follow the corridor to the left and take the stairs. We hope your stay is restful." Amelia hesitated before responding. "Restful?" she echoed. There was a peculiar cadence to his words, as though he were reciting a well-worn line. Ignoring the disquiet, she took the heavy iron key from him, nodding in gratitude. "Thank you," she managed, her voice wavering despite her attempt at casual politeness. The corridors in the motel were dimly lit, each step echoing against the cold, scuffed floorboards. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the occasional creak that sounded too deliberate to be attributed to an aging building settling. As she ascended the narrow staircase, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching her every move from the shadows. The sign on the door at the end of the hall read, "Room 7." With a final deep breath, she pushed the door open. The room was modest, furnished with a single bed, a small desk, and a window overlooking the dense forest beyond. The moon peered through the murky glass, casting eerie, elongated shadows across the carpet. Amelia set down her overnight bag and sat on the edge of the bed, determined to get some sleep and dispel the uneasy sensations threatening to consume her. That night, as she lay beneath a thin blanket, the incessant tick of a clock on the wall was joined by something far more insidious, a soft, persistent tapping. It came from somewhere behind the walls, a rhythm that resembled a heartbeat, irregular and yearning. At first, Amelia dismissed it as the sound of old pipes or the building's natural settling. But as the tapping grew louder, interspersed with low murmurs, indistinct yet mournful, her eyes snapped open in the dead of night. She sat up, her heart pounding, straining to locate the source of the sound. In the silence that followed, the whispers began. "Leave, leave," the voices hissed, layered beneath each other, as if echoing from 1,000 lost souls. The words were barely comprehensible, but the urgency within them was undeniable. Amelia's sleep-deprived mind wrestled with terror and incredulity. Had the motel's eerie atmosphere seeped into her dreams? Summoning every ounce of courage, she rose from the bed and moved toward the door. The corridor beyond was shrouded in deeper darkness, and as she inched forward, a shape materialized near the far end, a flickering form that seemed neither entirely human nor wholly spectral. The figure moved with a languid, almost sorrowful gait as it approached her. The air turned ice cold, and every breath felt like shards of glass piercing her lungs. Who are you?" she whispered, voice trembling. The figure stopped, its form wavering like smoke caught in a draft. Slowly, it spoke, "I am the keeper of regret. I am bound by sorrow that cannot rest." There was an eerie cadence to its speech, a melody of profound loss that resonated deep within her soul. Before Amelia could muster another question, the figure dissolved into the air, leaving her trembling alone in a corridor where the silence had returned, thick and accusatory. She retreated back to her room, her mind racing and her pulse a constant drumbeat of fear. As she fumbled with the light switch, shadows twisted on the walls, their shapes contorting into faces etched with despair. The next morning, fatigued but desperate to understand what she had experienced, Amelia sought an explanation. Down in the lobby, the gaunt clerk regarded her with unreadable eyes as she hesitantly asked, "What happened last night? I heard voices, saw something." The clerk's smile was thin and sorrowful. "Sometimes the walls speak here," he said cryptically. "They hold memories of the past, of tragedies and whispered regrets. You were not the first to be visited by those echoes." That answer, vague and unsatisfying, only deepened her unease. Determined not to let fear paralyze her, Amelia decided to investigate the motel's history. In the dusty, neglected archives kept in a locked cabinet behind the reception desk, she discovered a faded ledger filled with names and dates. Each entry recorded a guest's stay, and many were followed by a terse notation, "Departed in sorrow" or "Never returned." One name in particular sent a chill through her, Eleanor Winters, a young woman recorded as having checked in decades ago. According to a brittle newspaper clipping tucked within the ledger, Eleanor had vanished under mysterious circumstances, her last known location being Room 7. The article mentioned disturbing rumors of hallucinations, fits of despair, and relentless whispers that drove her to the brink of madness. No one knew what exactly became of her, but the motel's legacy, it seemed, was entwined with her tragedy. Later that afternoon, as a storm gathered ominously on the horizon, Amelia explored the building in an attempt to unearth more clues. She ventured into the basement, where layers of dust and cobwebs cloaked forgotten relics. The narrow, winding passageways seemed to breathe with a life of their own, each step echoing off moist, unyielding stone walls. In one cramped corner, she found a small, tattered diary hidden beneath a broken chair. The cover bore the initials EW, with a delicate flourish, confirming her suspicions. Inside the diary, Eleanor's frantic script chronicled her gradual descent into torment. Page after page, the entries detailed the inexplicable presence that haunted Room 7, a presence that grew ever more demanding as the nights lengthened. "It tells me secrets," one entry read, "of sins committed long ago. It demands I confess that I bear witness to all the pain. My soul is not my own." The entries grew increasingly desperate, with Eleanor pleading for release and forgiveness. The final page was a smear of red and ink, a final testament to the agony that had overtaken her. Clutching the diary, Amelia felt an overwhelming surge of empathy and terror. She vowed to free the restless spirit that had long been bound to Whispering Pines Motel. That night, as the storm unleashed its fury outside, she gathered her strength for a confrontation with the unseen forces that had haunted this place for so long. Back in Room 7, the oppressive atmosphere had returned in full force. The tapping and murmuring commenced anew, louder this time, as if in response to her defiant act. Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, the diary open in her trembling hands. "I know your pain," she whispered into the darkness, her voice steady despite the quiver of fear. "I know that you are trapped. Eleanor, if it is you, please speak to me." For several long, heart-stopping minutes, nothing happened. Then, softly, the temperature dropped, and the spectral figure reappeared, a translucent version of a young woman, her eyes filled with sorrow and pleading. "Help me," Eleanor's apparition murmured, voice overlapping with the sound of dripping water. "I've been trapped in this prison of memories for far too long." The spectral figure beckoned Amelia to follow, her ghostly hand outlining a path toward a battered door hidden behind a stack of old furniture. Intrigued and terrified, Amelia followed. The door led to a small, dusty chamber that had clearly been sealed off for years. Inside, the remnants of a bygone era lay frozen. A broken mirror, a rusted music box, and several faded photographs. On one wall, scrawled in peeling paint, was a message: "Only truth sets us free." Amelia's mind raced as she pieced together the clues. The diary spoke of confessions and sins, of dark secrets that had festered within these walls long before the motel had fallen into ruin. Perhaps, she mused, the key to releasing Eleanor, and the others whose regrets echoed throughout the motel, lay in confronting the truth of what had been hidden here. She sat down at the dusty desk in the chamber, the diary still open before her, and began reading aloud Eleanor's words, her voice echoing through the confined space. "I have seen what lies beneath our souls," she recited, her tone filled with both despair and determination. "The sins of the past have chained us, and until they are faced, we cannot rest." As Amelia's voice filled the room, an almost tangible energy began to coalesce around her. The photographs on the wall shimmered faintly, and the broken mirror began to glow with an ethereal light. A sudden spectral voice interrupted her reading. "Truth is the key," it said, imbued with the combined voices of many. "Face what you have done, what we have all done." The voices swirled around her, merging into a single, mournful plea that sent shivers down her spine. In that moment, Amelia realized that the motel had been a silent witness to countless tragedies, a repository of broken lives and unconfessed sins that had accumulated over decades. Eleanor's despair was merely one thread in a tapestry of sorrow woven into every crevice of this forsaken place. Determined to break the cycle, Amelia resolved to hold a kind of séance, a confrontation between the living and the dead. She gathered the small diary, the music box, and a scrap of parchment from behind the faded photographs that hinted at an ancient incantation. With trembling hands and a pounding heart, she arranged the items in a circle on the cold floor. The only light came from a single flickering candle she had found near the reception area. "Let the truth be spoken," Amelia intoned, her voice echoing in the cramped chamber. "Show me your sins, your regrets, so that we may set you free." The moment the words left her lips, the room erupted in a tumult of ghostly activity. The music box sprang to life, playing a haunting melody that resonated with the cadence of lost time. The broken mirror vibrated, casting fragmented images of past horrors: a man in despair, a child crying in silence, and a woman whose eyes were filled with unbearable grief. Slowly, The spectral figures began to materialize, each one a fragment of the motel's tortured history. Some wailed in anguish, while others merely stared vacantly, their faces etched with memories of betrayal and heartache. Among them, Eleanor's figure stood out, her sorrowful eyes now alight with a cautious glimmer of hope. "You must promise," she whispered, her ethereal voice merging with those of the others, "to remember our truth. Do not let us fade into nothingness." Amelia's voice faltered as she replied, "I promise. I will tell your story. I will show the world the pain hidden behind these walls." With that declaration, a final, cathartic surge of spectral energy passed through the chamber. The images in the broken mirror coalesced, the voices reaching a crescendo, and then, as if exhaling a long-held breath, the ghosts began to dissipate like mist in the morning sun. Outside, the storm subsided as abruptly as it had begun. The oppressive weight that had enshrouded Whispering Pines Motel lifted, replaced by an eerie, tentative calm. In the quiet that followed, Amelia felt an overwhelming sense of melancholy, tempered by relief. A bittersweet knowledge that while the ghosts of the past might finally rest, their stories would remain etched in her heart forever. The next morning, the motel's corridors seemed less like haunted mazes and more like solemn memorials, a place where history and regret had been acknowledged and perhaps forgiven. The gaunt clerk regarded Amelia with a subtle nod as she checked out. There was a quiet understanding in his eyes, a hint that he too had borne witness to the unspoken truths of that place. In the ensuing weeks, Amelia's account of her experience at Whispering Pines Motel spread through the town and beyond. Her detailed narrative, filled with intimate confessions of guilt and sorrow along with revelations of lingering evil, resonated with those who had long suspected that something dark lurked behind the veneer of everyday life. Critics and believers alike debated her story, but for Amelia, it was not the acclaim or disbelief that mattered. It was the promise she made to Eleanor, and the silent multitude of souls whose truths had finally been acknowledged. Each evening afterward, as dusk settled softly over the landscape, Amelia would find herself gazing out of her window. Though insomnia had not vanished entirely, the long, sleepless nights became less terrifying as she recalled that stormy night in the secluded chamber when truth unlocked the chains of sorrow. Every rustling leaf and every creak in the darkness now whispered a reminder to listen, to remember the voices of the lost and the lessons born out of unconfessed sins. Yet sometimes in the quietest hours before dawn, when the world slept unaware, Amelia would catch a glimpse of a spectral figure standing at the edge of shadow, a gentle reminder that while some ghosts had found rest, others might still wander, waiting for someone to hear their confession, waiting for a truth to be told. In that final understanding, there lay a profound beauty amid the terror. The darkness was no longer an enemy to be feared, but a somber archivist of lives lived and lost. And through her words, Amelia ensured that Whispering Pines Motel, with all its haunting despair and lingering hope, would never be forgotten.
Story number 4.
In the endless gray of a midwinter morning, when the sky was a brittle sheet of lead and the trees stood as gaunt sentinels against the frost, Rob Daniels drove along a rutted country road toward Blackwell's Manor. The sprawling, crumbling estate had loomed on the outskirts of Greyvale for generations, a site of whispered legends, untold tragedies, and a persistent sense of dread. Rob, a reserved archivist with a penchant for unearthing family histories, had inherited the manor from a distant relative he had never met. Compelled by equal parts curiosity and duty, he arrived at the mansion with little more than a suitcase, a box of old letters, and an uneasy feeling in his gut that hinted at the estate's sinister past. The manor's facade was a mournful silhouette against the bleak sky, its once grand stone walls now marred by the ravages of time and nature. Ivy clung like desperate fingers to the worn brick, while broken gargoyles lined the parapets, their features distorted by centuries of decay. As Rob stepped out of his car, the biting wind wrapped around him as though in warning, and each crunch of ice underfoot echoed a premonition of the horrors that lay hidden within. Upon entering through the heavy oak doors, the interior of Blackwell's Manor revealed a realm where light and shadow waged an eternal battle. The foyer was large and desolate, illuminated only by the trembling beam of his flashlight. Dust motes swirled in the air like restless phantoms, and a faint smell of damp decay permeated every corner. Against the wall hung an oversized, faded portrait of a stern matriarch whose eyes, though shrouded by age, seemed to follow him with an unyielding intensity. Rob felt a chill race down his spine, a silent warning that some memories were better left undisturbed. In the weeks that followed, Rob set about cataloging the relics of his family's history. He worked by day in a cluttered study filled with ancient ledgers, brittle diaries, and yellowed letters. The inscriptions chronicled the rise and tragic fall of the Blackwells, a once prominent family whose fortunes had crumbled amid scandal, betrayal, and inexplicable misfortune. As he pieced together stories of forbidden love, untimely deaths, and whispered curses, he began to sense that the manor itself was a living archive, a vessel of the dark emotions and tormented souls that had dwelled within its walls. One fog-laden evening, while Rob was poring over a particularly disturbing diary entry, a sudden knock echoed through the silent corridors of the manor. Startled, he set aside the fragile pages and headed toward the sound. The knocking, steady yet insistent, came from a heavy door at the end of a long hallway lined with faded family portraits. With trepidation pooling in his stomach, he grasped a rusted brass key from the desk and unlocked the door. Beyond lay a parlor draped in shadow and dust, a room that had once been vibrant with the laughter of parties and the rustle of elegant dresses. Now, the room was frozen in time. A grand piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and chipped, and a large mirror dominated the far wall, its silver backing tarnished by neglect. As Rob's eyes adjusted, he noticed a faint inscription on the mirror's frame. "We are forever bound by truth." The message sent a shudder through him. Before he could decipher its meaning, he heard a soft, plaintive whisper. "Rob." He spun around, heart hammering in his chest, but saw no one. The whisper had slid into his ear like a secret breathed by the wind. With a mixture of skepticism and dread, he turned back to the mirror, half expecting to see his own reflection. And there, faintly superimposed over his face, was the spectral outline of a woman with sorrowful eyes. Her expression was one of longing and pain, and as the image faded, the whispered plea grew louder in his mind. "Release me." Rob staggered back, the pages of the diary fluttering as if caught in an unseen current. Determined to get answers, he combed through the documents he'd collected. He found a series of letters penned in hurried, anguished script that referenced a curse, a dark bond that tethered the souls of the departed to the manor. The letters told of a woman, Annabelle Blackwell, whose love had been stolen and whose spirit now wandered the halls, seeking absolution for a long-forgotten sin. That night, as bitter winds howled outside and the creaks of the old mansion became a mournful chorus, Rob lay awake in the decrepit guest room above the study. Sleep eluded him as spectral images danced behind his eyelids. In a half-awake trance, he could hear multiple voices overlapping, snatches of conversation, desperate cries, and the plaintive murmur of a woman's voice repeating the single word, "Help." Unable to bear the torment of night, Rob gathered his courage and descended the sweeping staircase toward the parlor. In the flickering light cast by a solitary candle, the atmosphere was thick with a palpable tension, as if the walls themselves were laden with decades of regret. He approached the grand piano slowly, the surface cold under his trembling hand. As he rested his fingertips upon the keys, a sorrowful melody rang out, a tune he had never heard before, but which stirred something deep within his soul. It was a lament from the depths of despair, and the notes resonated with the sound of a life cut tragically short. Without warning, a figure emerged from the gloom. It was a woman in a flowing, antique gown, her hair cascading in disheveled waves around a face twisted with anguish. "You have come to see our truth," she intoned in a voice that was both gentle and filled with sorrow. "I am Annabelle Blackwell. I was betrayed, wronged, and left to suffer in silence. My spirit and those of my kin are trapped in this house by the weight of our unconfessed sins." Rob's voice caught in his throat. "What do you want from me?" he managed to whisper. Annabelle's luminous eyes softened, yet a profound grief lingered in them. "I want you to remember us. For every wrong, every heartbreak, and every lie. Only when our stories are told and our burdens acknowledged can we be released from this endless torment." Her words, echoing with centuries of suppressed pain, filled the room and seeped into Rob's very being. "But how can I help?" he asked, heart pounding as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of her request. She raised a spectral hand toward the mirror, and the inscription glowed faintly. The mirror binds us all to this house. It was forged by a promise of truth, by the vows that were broken and the secrets that we hid. To free us, you must confront the mirror's curse. You must confess the truth of our legacy at every unspeakable act that stained these halls so that our memories may finally find peace. With that, Annabelle began to fade into the shadows, leaving Rob alone in the parlor with the mirror's inscription pulsing like a heartbeat. Overwhelmed, he sank into a dusty armchair and contemplated the gravity of her plea. The house was an archive of all that had transpired within its walls, a repository of guilt and sorrow. Now the burden of these secrets lay on him, a challenge he had never imagined he would face. Days turned into restless nights as Rob set about his task. He meticulously gathered all the documents, letters, and diaries that chronicled the tragedies of the Blackwell family. Each account painted a picture of a lineage marred by betrayal, sorrow, and a deep-rooted darkness. There were stories of forbidden liaisons, bitter rivalries that ended in murder, and a series of inexplicable deaths that defied medical explanation. The more he read, the more the manor's haunted legacy came into focus. Every room, every corridor, and every rusted artifact in the mansion seemed to echo with the grief of the lost. One particularly stormy evening, when the wind howled like a chorus of wailing specters and the rain battered the ancient leaded windows, Rob sat in front of the mirror in the parlor, the candlelight flickering against his resolute face. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as if the house itself waited for a confession to shatter the cycle of despair. With trembling fingers, he opened a notebook and began to write, reciting aloud the heart-wrenching truth of the Blackwell legacy. We gather in the presence of truth, confronting the echoes of a past stained with sorrow and sin. In our silence, we have allowed cruelty to flourish. In our pride, we have condemned ourselves to eternal suffering. To break these chains, we must bear our souls to the light. I confess the dark deeds, the betrayals, and the broken promises that have cursed these hallowed halls. As he spoke, the mirror's surface began to ripple like disturbed water, and the faces of those long dead emerged, mingling in a spectral crowd. There was the gaunt visage of a man who had once been the patriarch, his eyes pleading for forgiveness, a child with tear-streaked cheeks, and a woman whose smile had long vanished into a grimace of pain. The room pulsed with the intensity of their collective suffering, a palpable force of sorrow and regret that threatened to overwhelm him. A voice, this one not belonging to Annabelle, but resonating from the crowd of apparitions, called out in a tone both anguished and tender, "Thank you. Thank you for speaking our truth." The voices swelled into a harmonious murmur, and for a fleeting moment, Rob felt the crushing weight of centuries lift from the air. In that instant, he recognized the enormity of what he had done. By confronting the darkness, he had offered these tormented souls a chance at redemption. Yet, as the calm descended, a new, more insidious presence made itself known. From the far end of the parlor, where the shadows gathered like living things, emerged a figure whose presence radiated malice. Draped in a tattered black cloak, the figure's face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and its eyes shone with a predatory gleam. "You think your words can absolve us?" the figure snarled, its voice cold and contemptuous. "The sins of Blackwell cannot simply be washed away with confessions and remorse. They are etched into the very stone of this house, and I am the keeper of that eternal shadow." Rob's heart pounded in terror as he rose from his chair, his hands shaking. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice barely audible over the rumble of the raging storm outside. The figure stepped forward, its every movement laced with malice. "I am Alistair Blackwell," it declared in a voice that was both proud and pitiless. "I was once the heir to this cursed legacy, and I embraced the darkness that our family nurtured. I chose power over pity, cruelty over compassion, and now I guard the secrets that should never be unearthed." Alistair's eyes bore into Rob's soul as he continued. "By daring to speak the truth, you have disturbed a balance that has been maintained through fear and silence. You have given voice to our regrets, yes, but you have also awakened the wrath of those who prosper in our misery." In that charged moment, the ghostly throng around the mirror stirred with renewed energy, as if torn between the desire for liberation and the terror of Alistair's promise of unending torment. Annabelle's spectral form appeared once more beside Rob, her eyes pleading. "Don't let him silence us again," she whispered fiercely. "We must be remembered so that we may finally be free." Rob's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. He had come seeking knowledge and found himself entangled in a supernatural battle of wills, a struggle between the desire for redemption and the forces that thrived on perpetual damnation. The storm outside deepened, matching the turmoil within the mansion. Thunder rumbled as if echoing the clash of unseen titans, and the very walls seemed to shudder in anticipation of the final reckoning. Gathering every ounce of his courage, Rob addressed Alistair directly. "I will not hide the truth. I will not allow the darkness to claim you or any soul in this house. The legacy of Blackwell is one of pain, but it can be transformed by acknowledging our mistakes and seeking forgiveness." Alistair sneered, his form flickering between solidity and shadow. "Your words are like brittle glass against a torrent of despair," he hissed. "You dare challenge a force that has prospered for generations. Tell me, Rob Daniels, are you willing to pay the ultimate price for such insolence?" Before Rob could answer, the room erupted in a cacophony of spectral voices. Apparitions converged upon him, each a manifestation of the family's myriad sins and sorrows, whispering, crying, and wailing in a chorus of anguish. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and the taste of old regrets, and in that moment Rob realized that he was standing at the crossroads of salvation and eternal damnation. With the storm's fury as his backdrop, Rob's voice rang out firm and resolute. "I accept that any true reckoning demands sacrifice, but I will not be complicit in the perpetuation of these horrors. I offer these souls their freedom by bearing witness to everything that has been hidden away in darkness. I confess, and in doing so, I bind my own fate to theirs, for better or for worse." The mirror's surface flared with a blinding light as Rob's words cascaded through the parlor. The shattered images of tormented souls began to coalesce, their voices merging into a single sorrowful melody of release. Annabelle and the others reached out to him in silent gratitude, and even as Alistair's form convulsed with fury, the oppressive force he commanded faltered beneath the sheer magnitude of truth. For a long, agonizing moment, time itself seemed to quiver. In that suspended heartbeat, Rob felt both the agony of every misdeed and the tender promise of absolution. The storm outside ebbed into a sorrowful drizzle, and the oppressive chill that had long suffused Blackwell's manor began to dissipate like a fading nightmare at dawn. Slowly, the spectral figures receded, their anguished visages softening into peaceful resignation. Annabelle, her form now bathed in a gentle, ethereal glow, stepped forward and placed a spectral hand upon Rob's shoulder. "You have done what many believed impossible," she murmured. "You have confronted our darkest truths. Go now, and let our stories live on, free from the curse of silence." Alistair's form wavered, a final curse echoing in his hollow voice as he dissolved into the shadows. "This is not the end," he rasped, "for the darkness remains within every heart that forgets its own sins." With that, his presence was swallowed by the dim recesses of the manor, leaving behind only the echoes of his malediction. In the aftermath of that fateful night, as dawn broke with a tentative promise of light over Greyvale, Rob Daniels emerged from Blackwell's manor forever changed. He carried with him not only the burden of a painful family history, but also a solemn responsibility to ensure that the voices of the past were never silenced again. In his subsequent writings and lectures, he recounted every harrowing detail: the spectral laments, the eerie whispers of the mirror, and the final cathartic confrontation that shattered the ancient curse. Yet, even as the world outside moved toward its daily rhythms of light and life, Rob could never fully shake the lingering presence of the manor. In the quiet hours of night, when the wind sighed against his window and shadows played upon his walls, he would sometimes swear he heard faint strains of that sorrowful melody, a reminder of the restless souls who had finally, if only momentarily, been set free. And so, as each day passed, he honored his promise to them by recording their tragedies and triumphs with unwavering honesty, a living testament to the power of truth in dispelling the most suffocating darkness. Though Blackwell's manor eventually fell to ruin, its legacy endured in Rob's words and in the collective memory of those who dared remember. For in embracing the truth, he had not only exorcised a centuries-old curse, but had also illuminated the path to redemption, one that would guide lost souls through the shadowed corridors of history toward the healing promise of light.
Story number 5.
The wind carried a scent of ancient earth and decay, as Louise Marshall drove the long, winding road to Briarwood Farm, a property shrouded by rumor and neglect on the outskirts of a small, isolated Midwestern town. The summer sun had long since surrendered to the encroaching veil of dusk when she finally reached the weathered iron gate. Once prouder than it now appeared, the estate was locked in time by overgrown hedges and the invasive grasp of wild ivy. Louise, a historian with a quiet determination to piece together the lost chapters of forgotten families, felt an inexplicable tug, a mixture of apprehension and duty, as she set foot on the creaking gravel drive. The farmhouse itself was a testament to faded grandeur. Its whitewashed wood now bore the scars of time and nature, and windows, smeared with the patina of dust and neglect, offered only distant, haunted reflections. Inside the silent halls, each room seemed steeped in mournful memories. Photographs in cracked frames displayed solemn faces staring back at her as though they knew secrets meant to remain buried. As she began to explore, the echo of her footsteps seemed to stir long-forgotten whispers. Louise spent her first days methodically rummaging through the remnants of life left behind, a scattering of letters, diaries, and brittle newspapers recounting the life of the Marshall family and the generations that preceded them. The documents painted a portrait of a prosperous lineage whose fortunes had once dazzled the county. But beneath the veneer of success lay dark and twisted tales of incest, betrayal, and an unspoken terror that began with the harvest season. The notes were laced with cryptic references to the awakening and warnings that the soil beneath the fields was cursed by remorse and despair. Late one humid evening, while sorting through a pile of yellow diaries in the attic, Louise discovered a leather-bound journal belonging to one Margaret Marshall, dated 1912. In cramped, hurried script, Margaret recounted the story of the harvest, a time when something inexplicable would rise from the fields, claiming retribution for sins unatoned. According to the journal, each autumn when the harvest was at its peak, a presence would emerge to haunt the corridors of the farmhouse and stalk the barren fields. The entries were filled with desperate confessions, pleas for forgiveness, warnings to future generations, and a recurring phrase that chilled Louise to the bone: "We reap what we sow." That night, as the farmhouse creaked and whispered in the darkness, Louise lay awake on a creaking cot in what had once been the guest room. The quiet murmur of the wind, slithering through broken window panes, mingled with the rhythmic scuffing outside her door. At first, she convinced herself it was merely the old building settling into the night. Yet, as the hours passed, an insistent tapping began at the base of the door, slow, deliberate, and impossibly irregular. With a hand trembling as much as her heart, she approached the door and opened it just a crack. A moment of dreadful silence greeted her, punctuated by the low, mournful sound of someone, or something, whispering her name. "Louise, come, reaps." The voice, so low it seemed to come from within the very walls, resonated with the sorrow of a past long denied. Terrified but compelled, she shut the door and backed away, a cold sweat dampening her skin. The following morning, resolute to uncover the truth behind the eerie nocturnal visitors, Louise ventured out to the fields behind the farmhouse. The farmland sprawled beneath a heavy sky, its fields a tangle of wind-blown stalks and barren earth. As she walked slowly between the rows of dying corn and withered wheat, the atmosphere grew dense with an unnerving stillness. There was no wind and no bird song, only the oppressive silence that carried the weight of untold secrets. Then, in the distance, she saw a figure. It stood motionless at the edge of the field, partially obscured by the tall stalks. As Louise advanced, the figure resolved into that of an old man, draped in weathered clothing reminiscent of another era. His eyes, dark and hollow, fixed on her as though he had been expecting her arrival. "You are the one who seeks our truth," he rasped. The voice was a brittle echo, matching the decay all around them. "Who are you?" Louise demanded, her voice barely above a whisper, though a chill crawled along her spine. The figure's answer was a sorrowful sigh carried by the wind. "I am Jeremiah, the last keeper of Briarwood's lament. I have watched over these lands for decades, burdened by the sins of my ancestors. Our harvest is tainted by betrayal. Each season we are forced to face the retribution of a curse that was sown long ago." His eyes flickered with anguish as he continued, "You must know our secret if you are to free us, for the dead are restless, and the vengeful spirits of our wrongs wander the fields." Over the following days, Louise engaged with Jeremiah and learned that the curse stemmed from a fateful night during a record harvest in 1887. A bitter dispute had erupted over the division of land among the Marshall siblings. Greed, envy, and bitter resentments boiled over, resulting in a grievous act of violence that left a family irrevocably broken. In the mad scramble for retribution, a young child had been sacrificed by a desperate relative in a desperate, misguided bid to appease darker forces. The ritual, steeped in occult fervor and ancient superstitions, was meant to bring bountiful crops, but instead it unleashed something terrible upon the land, an insatiable hunger that fed on remorse and despair. One evening, as dusk bled into night, Louise arranged a small gathering in the parlor of the farmhouse with Jeremiah and a few local elders who still remembered fragments of the old stories. Their voices, steeped in archaic dialect and trembling with old pain, recounted the final days of the harvest when spectral shapes were seen among the cornstalks, and the land itself seemed to bleed. A soft voice from one elder trembled. "The spirits demand penance, a confession of our sins that have marred this soil. Until we lay bare our darkest secrets, the harvest will claim us all." Moved by their collective grief, Louise vowed to capture the truth, both for the sake of the living and the dead. That night, armed with nothing more than an old recorder, the journal of Margaret Marshall, and a determination forged in terror and empathy, she prepared to confront the forces swirling in the darkness of Briarwood Farm. After a long, restless vigil filled with the heavy sounds of her own heartbeat and the occasional distant wail that might have been the wind or something else, Louise found herself in the center of the barn. The vast, echoing structure was littered with rusted farming tools and long-forgotten relics of a time when the land was tended with love rather than fear. Shadows played along the walls as a solitary lantern cast a flickering circle of light around her. In the center of that circle, she began to speak aloud the confessions from Margaret's journal. "With each harvest we reap a sorrow, with every seed sown, a secret buried deep," she intoned, voice trembling yet resolute. "I confess the sins of greed and neglect, of betrayal born of envy. I confess that our innocence was sacrificed on the altar of ambition, and the land has cried out for atonement ever since." As her words resonated in the silence of the barn, the air grew thick, and she felt as though invisible eyes were closing in around her. A low moan, like the sound of wounded earth, filled the space. Slowly, the temperature plummeted, and before her eyes, spectral shapes began to shimmer into focus, a mist of anguished faces emerging among the shadows. One face, that of a small child with tear-streaked cheeks, hovered close. The child's eyes were filled with incomprehensible sorrow. "Set us free," it whispered, a plea that reverberated through every fiber of her being. Then, as if summoned by her declaration, a figure stepped forward from the darkness. It was a woman, her dress tattered and her hair wild, her expression twisted in a mixture of grief and terror. "You speak our truth, yet truth alone is not enough," she cried, her voice amplified by the uncanny acoustics of the barn. "We demand acknowledgement of what was done. The sacrifice we suffered will not be forgotten unless the full measure of our horror is known." Her ethereal hand extended toward Louise in a silent entreaty. Louise's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and responsibility. With trembling hands, she retrieved her recorder and began to record the spectral testimony. Each apparition spoke in a disjointed chorus, voices overlapping in a manic litany of sorrow, rage, and regret. The woman continued, "Our spirit, our innocence, is bound to this earth. Reveal our story so that the world may atone for the sins that have shackled us." Outside, the night deepened until even the stars seemed to have abandoned the sky, leaving behind only a cold, unfathomable black. The recording captured not just her words, but the sinister undertone of pleading that rippled through the barn like a curse. Suddenly, the ghostly chorus surged into a fevered crescendo. The apparitions' eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and in unison they chanted, "We are the harvest of sorrow. We are the reaping of regret. Avenge the sacrifice." The light of the lantern sputtered violently as the building seemed to groan in protest. An overwhelming pressure pressed in on Louise as if the very air were laden with centuries of suppressed anguish. In that moment, she understood that the dark force was not merely an aggregation of lost souls, but a malevolent presence, an entity born from and nourished by the unconfessed sins of generations. Its anger was palpable, a force that could engulf and destroy. As the ghostly figures swirled around her, the farmer's resolve hardened. "I will tell your story," she vowed in a voice that rang out boldly against the cacophony of despair. "I will lift the veil of silence and ensure that the truth is known. I confess with you tonight, the sins of the past shall find their reckoning in the light of day." Her words reverberated against the wood and stone, carrying a power born of both fear and determination. Just then, a forceful gust of wind slammed the barn doors open. The cold air carried with it a voice deep and resonant, a voice that belonged not to any single soul, but to the very spirit of the cursed land. "Beware," it warned, echoing through the barn like the toll of a death knell, for the price of truth is steep, and not all wounds can be healed by confession. The spectral chorus paused as if in acknowledgement of this dark decree. The apparitions began to fade, their presence dissolving into the inky darkness of the night, while their final words, full of longing and retribution, whispered on the wind. "Remember us," they pleaded, "or be forever haunted by the harvest of our sorrow." In the days that followed, Louise's recordings and transcripts of that eerie night became the subject of relentless inquiry by both the local press and academic circles. Some dismissed her account as the product of an overactive imagination spurred by isolation and despair, but others, those who had long felt a peculiar heaviness in their souls, understood. The story of Briarwood Farm, with its horrific legacy of betrayal and bloodshed, became a grim parable of a past that refused to die. Louise herself felt forever changed. In quiet moments, when the winds of autumn began to echo across barren fields, she would catch a fleeting glimpse of a small child's face in a window, or hear a sorrowful whisper calling her name from the darkness. Yet rather than fear, she found a solemn purpose in ensuring that the sins of the past were never repeated, that the true horror of human actions be acknowledged so that healing might one day begin. Years later, her account was published in a lengthy, meticulously documented book that detailed not only the haunted legacy of Briarwood Farm, but also served as a grim reminder. The scars of history run deep, and the earth itself can remember and demand justice for what was once sown in blood and despair. Every harvest season thereafter, as the winds swept over the barren fields and the golden stalks bowed with a heavy, almost imperceptible sorrow, the townsfolk whispered of a curse that had finally been met with truth. And in the quiet of long, frigid nights, if one listened closely, they could still hear a faint chorus, a promise that the lost souls would be remembered, and that only when every sin was confessed, every secret unearthed, could the land ever truly know peace.
Story number 6.
Ethan Calloway had always been drawn to stories that blurred the lines between myth and reality. So when he first heard about Ironwood Asylum, an abandoned institution once notorious for its cruel methods of treating the mentally ill, he felt an inexplicable pull to uncover its secrets. The asylum, now overgrown with ivy and shrouded in perpetual twilight, was said to harbor echoes of its tortured past. Locals whispered that on moonless nights the cries of lost souls and eerie laughter could be heard drifting on the wind. Although skeptical by nature, Ethan couldn't ignore the magnetic lure of the asylum's tragic history, and he arranged an expedition to document the truth behind the legends. Under a slate-gray sky, Ethan drove his aging pickup down a winding country road until the imposing structure of Ironwood loomed into view. The building was massive, its brick walls heavily scarred by time and neglect. Once an edifice of sterile corridors and whispered promises of healing, it now appeared as nothing more than a mausoleum of sorrow. As he stepped out, the chill of the late autumn air wrapped around him like a shroud. His camera and notebook in hand, he crossed the threshold into the labyrinth of decaying hallways. The main hall was cavernous, its once proud murals now faded into splotches of peeling paint and cracks that ran like scars across the ceiling. Dust swirled in the beam of his flashlight, and every footstep echoed as if disturbing the restless dead. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he made his way deeper into the asylum, recording every detail. The rusting wheelchairs, the discarded medical instruments strewn across the floor, and the old patient logs scrawled with names and incoherent notes. In one particularly dark corridor, he discovered a door marked Ward 7. The tarnished brass numbers glinted ominously under his light. As he pushed it open, a sudden gust of frigid wind burst forth, carrying with it the stale scent of decay and despair. Inside, the room was in disarray. Broken windows allowed moonlight to spill across the dusty floor, where abandoned beds lay contorted into unsettling angles. In one corner, a large, cracked mirror reflected his tentative face, but behind him, a fleeting glimpse of a gaunt, expressionless figure sent chills down his spine. "Who's there?" Ethan called, his voice betraying more trepidation than resolve. The mirror remained silent, except for the echo of his own question. Yet, as he advanced, every instinct screamed that he was not alone. There, etched into the far wall in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "We remember." With every step, Ethan felt the oppressive presence of the past closing in. His recorder captured disjointed murmurs, as if a cacophony of whispers from long-dead patients was conversing just beyond the range of his hearing. Determined not to be overwhelmed by fear, he pressed on into the winding corridors of the asylum, each turn presenting fresh horror and lingering sorrow. In what once had been the administrative office, strewn with decaying files and antique furniture, he found a diary bound in cracked leather. The diary, belonging to a nurse named Margaret Hensley, chronicled the grim realities of life in Ironwood. In her trembling scrawl, she detailed unspeakable acts: patients subjected to electroshock treatments, illicit experiments in isolation, and methods so brutal they left scars not only on the body, but on the soul. One entry in particular made his blood run cold. "Last night, I heard them. The voices of those who suffered, demanding retribution for the cruelty inflicted upon them. They speak of a man in a black coat and a cold smile. He is the tormentor who collects our pain. I fear our screams will be silenced, but in the echo, we will never truly vanish." A floorboard creaked behind Ethan, and he spun around to see nothing but shifting shadows. His mind raced. Was it merely the building settling or something more sinister stalking him? His skepticism battled with a creeping dread, and he resolved to set up his camera to record any unusual occurrences. As darkness deepened, the asylum itself seemed to awaken, its corridors pulsing with an almost sentient malice. Settling into a makeshift campsite in the asylum's chapel, a once sacred space now desecrated by time, Ethan arranged his equipment and prepared for a night of investigation. The chapel was a stark, cavernous room with shattered stained glass casting fractured rainbows of light onto the stone floor. Pews lay disordered, and at the altar, a dilapidated crucifix hung askew. It was here that Ethan decided to rest, his recorder capturing the ambient sound of creaking wood and distant echoes that seemed to murmur unintelligible phrases. At midnight, as the wind outside whistled through broken panes, Ethan awoke to a sound that halted his heart. Faint tapping emanated from deep within the chapel. He sat bolt upright, eyes straining in the darkness, trying to locate the source of the sound. Slowly, the tap-tapping grew louder, punctuated by soft, mournful voices that whispered his name. "Ethan, Ethan, come." The voice was unmistakably human, yet distorted by an otherworldly quality. Despite his pounding heart, he grabbed his flashlight and edged toward the sound. As he stepped past a row of decayed pews, he caught sight of a figure at the far end of the chapel. It was a woman, translucent and sorrowful, her eyes pleading with him to come closer. "Help me," she implored in a voice barely audible above the ambient groaning of the building. "Release us from this torment." "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. The apparition's lips parted in an eternal sigh as she whispered, "I am Annabelle, a victim of the man in black, trapped in a cycle of pain that stretches beyond death. You must remember our suffering." Her eyes, wide and tear-streaked, searched his face as if desperately seeking solace. Before Ethan could reply, the temperature plummeted further, and the woman's form wavered. In the same moment, a deep, resonant laugh, cruel and disembodied, echoed through the chapel. "You think you can unearth our truth and free us?" The voice boomed, bouncing off the stone walls. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as another figure emerged from the darkness. A tall, gaunt man clad in an ancient, tattered black coat. His eyes were devoid of mercy, and his smile was a rictus of eternal malice. "You are meddling where you should not," the man intoned, each word dripping with disdain. "Our suffering is our curse, and to disturb it is to invite despair." His gaze locked on Ethan, sending a shiver of foreboding through him. "Leave now, or join us in our eternal lament." Ethan stood frozen, torn between the compelling need to document the truth and the paralyzing fear that threatened to overwhelm him. "Who are you?" he asked once more, though his voice was barely a whisper. The figure tilted his head slowly, his laugh subsiding into a cold snarl. I am Dr. Malcolm Crane, and I was the architect of this asylum's horrors. My experiments, my methods, they were all designed to break the human mind until it crumbled into nothingness. The patients, they were not mistakes but offerings to the darkness. And now, their anguish fuels my eternal presence here. As he spoke, his form seemed to ripple with maleficent energy, and the ghostly faces of suffering flickered along the walls as if summoned by his words. Annabelle's apparition trembled beside him. Dr. Crane, he never let us go. He bound us all to this place. Her voice was a broken melody of grief and desperation. Our pain is the price he paid to defy death, and now his curse lives on, condemning us to this never-ending nightmare. The revelation washed over Ethan like a tidal wave. The asylum was not merely haunted by the residual echoes of past cruelty. It was the very nexus of a malevolent force that had been nurtured by human suffering and twisted ambition. His mission, once purely journalistic, now took on a deeper urgency. He had to expose the unspeakable horrors of Ironwood Asylum so that the dead might finally be granted the peace they'd been denied. Gathering what little courage he possessed, Ethan steadied his voice. I will tell your story, he promised, his eyes glistening with determination despite the terror threatening to consume him. I will expose every atrocity committed here, every cry that went unheard. Your voices will be known to the living. Crane's eyes narrowed to slits. You are a fool if you think that words can undo the darkness we've wrought, he hissed, stepping closer. His presence radiated an aura of despair so potent that the very air seemed to crackle with malice. Yet if you are resolute, then so be it. But be warned, truth comes at a steep price. The confrontation reached its apex as the chapel's stained glass splintered in a sudden burst of wind and shattered light. The spectral figures that had hovered in the peripheral shadows converged as one, their voices melding into a single mournful chorus that filled the space with the weight of forgotten agony. In that surreal moment, time seemed to warp. Past and present collided in a dance of tortured souls, and Ethan felt the burden of centuries of unuttered grief pressing down on him. Through the chaos, Annabelle's spectral form reached out once more. To free us, you must confront the mirror of our truth, she intoned, her voice resonating with the cadence of sorrow. Deep within the asylum lies the reflection room, a chamber that holds the final account of our suffering. Only by witnessing it and sharing its revelations can you break the cycle of pain. Ethan hesitated only for a heartbeat before nodding. I'll find it, he said, his voice trembling yet resolute. I won't let your suffering be forgotten. With the guidance of Annabelle's whisper, Ethan made his way through winding hallways and crumbling staircases until he reached a narrow, secluded corridor behind a rusted iron door. The passage was dimly lit by the faint glow of his dying flashlight, and every step echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. At the corridor's end lay a heavy wooden door, its surface marred by deep scratches and embossed with an unfamiliar symbol, a mirror with its reflection cracked like shattered glass. Inside, the reflection room was circular and utterly bare, save for a large, ornate mirror that dominated one wall. Its frame, carved with images of anguished figures, seemed to pulsate as if alive. Ethan approached, his heart pounding, and stared into the mirror. At first, he saw only his own pale, fearful face. But slowly, the mirror's surface began to stir, and scenes emerged, vivid, brutal, and heartbreaking. He saw the tormented eyes of patients restrained in padded cells, their cries for mercy drowned out by the mechanical hum of torture devices. He saw Dr. Crane conducting his inhuman experiments with clinical detachment, while shadowy figures writhed in silent agony around him, faces blurred into one another, each one narrating a lost life, a stolen hope. The mirror revealed the hidden truths, whispered confessions, desperate pleas for forgiveness, and the raw terror of souls trapped in a cycle of endless torment. Ethan's throat tightened as he absorbed the horrors before him. In the mirror's reflection, he saw the embodiment of every injustice committed within these walls, the countless lives shattered by cruelty and neglect. His hands trembled and tears welled in his eyes. Yet, even as despair clawed at him, he realized that his role was not to be a passive observer. With a shaking breath, he began recording every detail, narrating what he witnessed as though his very life depended on it. They were forgotten, but tonight, they will speak. I see the agony of the lost, the cruelty etched into every scar on these walls. each face a testament to pain, the unspeakable acts committed in the name of a perverse ambition. I bear witness to their torment, to the madness of a man who vowed to defy death by damning the souls of the innocent. A sudden, disembodied laugh echoed from the mirror, a sound that was both mirthless and mocking. Dr. Crane's voice reverberated once more, thick with bitter derision. "You dare record our truth as if it could cleanse your own soul?" he spat. "You have seen what lies behind the facade of your reality, and now you must carry it with you forever." The mirror's images intensified. The tortured wails of the damned, the dark rituals performed in secret, and the slow, deliberate erosion of hope. In that moment, the room seemed to shudder with the combined weight of its horrors. The spectral faces in the mirror turned toward Ethan, their eyes pleading for vindication. Drawing upon every ounce of resolve, Ethan declared, "I will not let your pain be in vain. Your truth will be told, so that the living may learn from your suffering and the darkness you endured." His voice was resolute, echoing against the oppressive silence of the reflection room. For a heartbeat, the mirror's surface glowed with an intense light, as if absorbing Ethan's vow. Then, just as suddenly, the light faded, leaving him alone with the silent, harrowing reflections of the past. The spectral voices receded, their whispers lingering in the corners of his mind. Emerging from the reflection room, Ethan felt irrevocably changed. The oppressive air of Ironwood Asylum had begun to lift, replaced by a quiet stillness that carried a promise of remembrance. Outside, the early hints of dawn crept over the horizon, bathing the decrepit building in a pale, forgiving light. Yet even as the asylum exhaled a weary sigh of resignation, Ethan knew that its secrets would forever haunt him, etched into his memory like scars. In the days and weeks that followed, Ethan compiled his recordings, photographs, and notes into a meticulous account of the horrors he had witnessed. His exposé on Ironwood Asylum shook the local community, drawing both deniers and believers into heated debates about the legacy of cruelty and madness. Critics dismissed his findings as the ramblings of an overzealous wanderer, while others insisted that the voices of the dead still echoed in the silent halls of the asylum. Late at night, when the world slumbered unaware, Ethan sometimes found himself haunted by the asylum's memories. In quiet moments, he would catch fleeting images of Annabelle's sorrowful eyes, or hear the sinister chuckle of Dr. Crane echo from distant corridors. Yet with each recollection, his determination only grew stronger. The dead must be remembered, and their anguish should serve as a warning to the living. Ethan's writings soon became a beacon for those searching for truth in the darkness, a narrative that transcended mere ghost stories to become a solemn chronicle of human cruelty and the resilience of lost souls. His account served not only as a historical record, but also as a testament to the idea that confronting one's deepest horrors could pave the way for healing and redemption, even if the cost was a burden that one carried for a lifetime. As he continued his work, Ethan often revisited Ironwood Asylum, this time not as a fearful intruder, but as a respectful chronicler, a guardian of memories too painful to forget. With every visit, he sensed the asylum's lingering spirit not as a malevolent force, but as a repository of lessons. That truth, no matter how harrowing, was the only key to breaking the chains of the past. On one crisp, clear evening, several months later, as the first stars began to twinkle above the quiet countryside, Ethan stood before the crumbling facade of Ironwood Asylum one last time. The building, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, seemed less a monument to horror than a somber memorial to lives shattered by cruelty. He whispered a quiet promise to the silent watchers in the dark, that their story would live on through his words. A constant reminder that even in the depths of despair, truth could illuminate the path toward redemption. And as he turned his back on the asylum and walked away, the wind carried a faint, almost imperceptible murmur, a murmur of gratitude, of sorrow, and of an eternal hope that at long last the echoes of the past would be honored and never forgotten.
Story number 7.
A bitter wind swept across the barren moors as dusk crept over Ashmore Manor, a once stately mansion now reduced to a crumbling relic on the edge of nowhere. The sky was a bruised canvas of purple and slate, and the tall, gnarled trees surrounding the property seemed to whisper secrets of long-forgotten sins. Rumors in the nearby village told tales of disappearances, strange lights dancing at the windows at night, and a sense of gloom so oppressive it could suffocate the soul. For years, the manor had stood abandoned, its windows like hollow eyes staring out into the cold night, guarding mysteries no one dared confront. That was until Mara Ellison arrived, a determined and inquisitive journalist driven by a restless urge to unveil the truth buried deep within Ashmore's history. Mara had grown up in a world where facts and figures reigned supreme, until the day an old family friend, trembling as she recounted her own harrowing encounter near the manor, persuaded Mara that some legends were born of more than mere gossip. With a notebook, a digital recorder, and an unyielding resolve, Mara embarked on a journey to discover the dark heart of Ashmore Manor. The iron gates groaned as Mara pushed them open, their rusted hinges echoing like a long-forgotten dirge. The gravel crunching beneath her boots sounded unnaturally loud, a stark reminder of the isolation that awaited her. The mansion loomed ahead, its once elegant facade marred by time and neglect. Ivy strangled the walls, and shattered windows reflected the dying light in jagged shards. Every detail of the manor spoke of decay and despair, as if nature itself had been forced to surrender before the weight of the terrible secret lying within. Inside, the foyer was a vast, ghostly expanse. Dust motes floated in the beams of her flashlight, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls. Their painted eyes, smudged by the passage of time, seemed to follow Mara as she walked further into the depths of the house. The silence was oppressive, a silence punctuated only by the sound of her measured breathing and the distant, irregular drip of water echoing through empty corridors. Mara set up her equipment in what appeared to have once been a grand parlor. Here, a decrepit piano sat beneath a shattered chandelier, its keys yellowed by neglect. In a corner, a faded rug still bore the pattern of a once proud heritage. She paused, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light, and then began to explore. Her recorder clicked on as she whispered, "Ashmore Manor, a place where time has forgotten to move on." She wasn't sure if anyone would ever hear her words, but she felt compelled to speak the truth she was about to unearth. Almost immediately, the silence was shattered by a sound, a soft, rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from upstairs. Mara's heart picked up its pace, and she clutched her notepad as she moved cautiously toward the grand staircase. The creak of the ancient wood under her weight sounded like a warning. Each step led her further into the labyrinth of shadowed hallways, where the air was thick with the musk of decay and sorrow. Halfway up the stairs, a faint whisper caressed her ear, indistinct yet laden with emotion. "Leave, before it takes you." The voice was not loud, but carried the unmistakable quality of desperation, as if a soul long imprisoned was pleading for release. Mara's logical mind warred with the icy shiver running through her body. "Is someone there?" she called softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Only silence replied, a silence that was both a refuge and a taunt. Determined to understand the voice's source, Mara ascended to the second floor. The long corridor was lined with closed doors, each bearing ornate numbers now dulled by age. Her flashlight beam landed on one door in particular, room 13. The number was scratched violently into the wood, as if carved by frantic fingers. The door stood slightly ajar, and a dim, flickering light seeped through the gap. With a mix of terror and curiosity, Mara pushed the door open. Inside was a modest room that had once been a guest chamber. Layers of dust and cobwebs veiled broken furniture, and a single, cracked mirror hung above a once elegant dressing table. It was then that Mara noticed something peculiar. Etched along the mirror's edge was a message, scrawled in what appeared to be desperate, shaky handwriting. "Remember our pain, for we are chained in sorrow." Before she could react, the temperature in the room dropped drastically. Mara's breath appeared as a thin mist, and a presence, a slow, insidious weight, seemed to press on her chest. From the corner of the mirror, a figure began to emerge. At first, it was no more than a distortion in the glass, but then it resolved into the shape of a pale, gaunt woman with hollow eyes. Her expression was one of anguish and longing, a silent cry for help. "Who are you?" Mara stuttered, her voice barely a whisper as the apparition's spectral form grew clearer. The ghost's voice was soft, laden with sorrow and regret. "I am Eleanor Ashmore, and I am trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. The secrets of this house, the horrors we endured, we cannot rest until our story is told." Tears welled in Mara's eyes. "What happened here?" she asked, stepping closer, though every instinct screamed to flee. In a slow, pained cadence, Eleanor recounted a tale of tragedy and injustice. Decades ago, when the manor thrived with life and opulence, a terrible event had shattered the family's legacy. Eleanor and her siblings had been confined within these very walls by their tyrannical father, whose cold obsessions with immortality led him to commit unspeakable acts. In one night of blood and screams, he had orchestrated a macabre ritual, sacrificing the purity of his children in a desperate bid to preserve his own fading existence. Their tortured souls had been bound to the manor, cursed to wander its halls, and bear witness to the cruelty that had forever stained the lineage of Ashmore. As the ghost finished her confession, the room trembled with a sudden, inexplicable force. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and for an instant, Mara saw flickering images of events long past. A terrified child's eyes, a frantic scream, the dim glow of torches amid chaos. The visions were accompanied by a chorus of anguished voices crying out in unison, "Justice, remember." Then, in the depths of that unnerving moment, the heavy door behind Mara slammed shut with a deafening bang. Startled, she spun around, her pulse racing. The room was plunged into darkness, and the only sound was the relentless beating of her own heart. "Eleanor, are you here?" she managed to ask, her voice echoing in the void. A fragile light emerged from the corridor outside, beckoning her with a haunting promise. Mara's rational mind urged caution, yet the desperate longing in Eleanor's voice filled her with an irresistible compulsion to follow the path laid out by the tortured spirit. "I promise I will help you," she murmured. Navigating the endless corridors of Ashmore Manor, Mara followed the spectral light and the soft whispers that guided her deeper into the bowels of the house. Each step seemed to awaken dormant memories in the very walls, a creak here, a faint sob there, that intensified the oppressive atmosphere. Finally, she reached a vast chamber concealed behind a heavy, dust-choked door. This was the manor's forgotten library, a vast room whose towering shelves held the records of generations, many of them chronicling not triumph but despair. In the center of the library was an ancient desk with a single weathered ledger. The pages were filled with meticulous records of births, deaths, and mysterious disappearances that had plagued the Ashmore lineage for years. Mara began to read, her eyes scanning the faded ink. It became chillingly clear that the manor's curse was not a recent phenomenon. It had been nurtured by generations of cruelty, grief, and the deliberate concealment of sin. Lost in her thoughts, Mara did not hear the heavy footsteps until they were almost upon her. A deep, gravelly voice broke the silence. "You dare disturb our legacy?" Startled, Mara looked up to see a tall, gaunt figure standing amid the shadows. His eyes were dark, almost bottomless, and his posture exuded a chilling authority. "Who are you?" she demanded, summoning all her courage. The figure's thin lips curved into a predatory smile. "I am Vincent, the last heir to a name that carries both pride and a burden of unspeakable guilt. I have watched over these halls, ensuring that our secrets remain locked away, and you, an intruder, threaten to unravel everything." His voice was cold and dismissive, yet underneath the veneer of arrogance was an undercurrent of bitterness and sorrow. Vincent's eyes bore into Mara's, and for a moment it was as if the weight of 1,000 regrets passed between them. "Our family's fate was sealed on that cursed night," he continued, his tone suddenly shifting to one of bitter resignation. "Our very souls are entwined with the misery this house exudes. To reveal our truth now would be to open wounds that have festered for too long." Mara's heart hammered in her chest as she realized that Vincent was not simply a guardian of dark secrets. He was a victim, shackled by legacy and the sins of the past. "But people need to know what truly happened," she insisted, her voice trembling yet determined. "If your story is forgotten, then the cycle of horror continues unabated. Lives have been lost and souls remain ensnared by the weight of unconfessed guilt." Vincent's eyes flickered momentarily with conflict, as though the burden he carried fought against the desire to silence the truth. For a long moment, the only sound in the vast, dusty library was the rhythmic ticking of an ancient clock on the wall, a metronome counting the seconds of unrelieved torment. Finally, Vincent spoke, his voice softer now. "I once believed that preserving our history in secrecy could offer a twisted semblance of protection. But the truth is a relentless force, one that will always claw its way into the light. If you wish to free us, then you must confront the heart of our despair. even if it means facing the darkest parts of our souls. Together, the spectral figure of Eleanor and the conflicted Vincent led Mara to a hidden chamber beneath the manor, a subterranean vault where the darkest of memories lay entombed. The narrow staircase descended into a labyrinth of stone corridors lit by flickering, unreliable candles. Every step reinforced the heavy, sinking feeling Mara had carried since her arrival. In this secret crypt, the walls were adorned with faded tapestries depicting scenes of terror and sorrow, and in the center of the room stood an imposing stone sarcophagus. Etched upon the sarcophagus was a single cryptic phrase: "Only by facing our sins can redemption be attained." Mara approached the sarcophagus, her hand hovering over the cold, rough surface. "What must I do?" she asked, the weight of responsibility clear in her voice. Eleanor's spectral form drifted close, her eyes brimming with a sorrow that transcended time. "You must confess the sins of our lineage," Eleanor whispered, her voice resonating with an ethereal echo. "Every act of cruelty, every betrayal must be acknowledged. Only then can the chains that bind our souls be shattered." Vincent stepped forward, his face conflicted but resolute. "It is not enough to simply recall the past," he said quietly. "One must bear the weight of it, to reveal the truth to the world so that our suffering may at last be understood, if not forgiven." Mara knew then that her journey was not merely one of investigation. It had become a quest for absolution, for the souls trapped within Ashmore Manor, and perhaps even for her own. She took a deep, steadying breath and began to document everything, speaking aloud the painful details revealed through the ancient ledger and the whispered confessions of lost spirits. In a voice that trembled with both fear and fierce determination, she recited, "We gather amidst these broken walls to bear witness to our sins, to acknowledge the sorrow that has bound us for generations. In our betrayal, in our cruelty, we have sown seeds of despair. Today, we lay bare the truth, not for glory, but for the hope of redemption and release." As Mara's words echoed in the vaulted chamber, the flickering candlelight quivered, and the stone sarcophagus began to tremble as if stirred by an unseen force. The ground beneath her feet shuddered, and the layers of dust and regret rose in spiraling eddies. The apparitions around her, Eleanor, Vincent, and countless shadowed figures, seemed to collectively exhale a long-held breath, their tortured souls stirred by the act of confession. A sudden, thunderous cracking resounded through the chamber, and the stone lid of the sarcophagus slowly slid open with an agonizing groan. A cold, spectral wind burst forth, carrying with it a chorus of voices, whispered, mournful, yet imbued with a hint of release. In that tumultuous moment, Mara saw the faces of those long forgotten: a child's terrified gaze, a mother's sorrowful eyes, a young man's regretful stare, all mingled in a swirling tempest of anguish and ultimately forgiveness. Vincent's features softened, tears glistening in the depths of eyes that had witnessed centuries of torment. "Perhaps now we can be free," he murmured, as if speaking to both the living and the dead. For what felt like an eternity, the chamber was filled with the sound of truth, a cathartic wave of sorrow, remembrance, and the fragile promise of absolution. When the storm of spectral voices finally subsided, a calm had settled over the vault. The oppressive presence that had haunted Ashmore Manor appeared to be lifting, replaced by a bittersweet stillness. Mara, trembling but resolute, recorded every detail of that final moment. With Vincent and Eleanor by her side, she left the hidden chamber, the ancient secret now shared with the world. The journey back up the creaking staircase was no longer just a descent from darkness into light. It was a triumphant, if sorrowful, emergence from a past that had enslaved so many for too long. In the weeks and months that followed, Mara's exposé on Ashmore Manor rocked the nearby village and beyond. Her detailed account, interwoven with the haunting testimonies of the restless spirits, became a catalyst for truth. While many dismissed the story as an elaborate ghost tale, those who had known of the manor's dark legacy began to embrace the reality that darkness often hides in plain sight. Yet, for Mara, every day was a reminder of that fateful night. In quiet moments, while reviewing her notes at her desk or walking along the lonely road back to the ruined estate, she could still hear faint whispers carried by the wind, the lingering voices of those once bound by sorrow. And sometimes, as twilight descended and the manor's silhouette emerged against a blood-red sky, she felt that the secret of Ashmore Manor was not entirely laid to rest. Its legacy, etched in the very stones of the building, would forever serve as a stark reminder that the price of truth, though high, was the only hope for redemption. Mara's work paved the way for a new understanding of Ashmore's tragic history. People came to see the manor not simply as a haunted relic, but as a monument to the lives lost, the sins committed, and the deep, enduring need for forgiveness and healing. In time, the spectral whispers began to fade, replaced by the quiet murmur of remembrance, a promise that no soul would be forgotten if its story was told. And as the seasons turned, Ashmore Manor, though still shrouded in mystery, seemed to exude a gentler aura, a melancholy yet respectful silence that spoke of finality, of wounds slowly closing, and of darkness yielding bit by bit to the soft light of understanding.
Story number 8.
The city's underbelly had always whispered secrets to those brave or desperate enough to listen. Marcus Llewellyn's footsteps echoed on the damp concrete as he descended the narrow, rust-stained stairwell of the abandoned northern terminal, a relic of a bygone era when the subway network was the lifeblood of the metropolis. Tonight, as a chill wind snaked through broken windows and the distant hum of the city above faded into an eerie silence, he felt an inexplicable pull to uncover what lay beneath. Marcus was no stranger to urban legends. As a freelance documentarian with a taste for the paranormal, he had spent years sifting through faded photographs and forgotten archives, piecing together the gruesome history of his city. His fascination with the old subway system was born of rumors that beneath the modern bustle lay a labyrinth of sealed-off tunnels and hidden stations, a catacomb of lost souls. What most dismissed as mere myth, Marcus believed, was rooted in a stark, horrifying truth. Armed with only a handheld digital recorder, a camera, and a notebook laden with scribbled maps and old news clippings, Marcus pressed on through the darkness. The air in these hidden corridors was heavy with the scent of mildew and rust, a tangible memento of decay. Every step sent tremors through his body, but the excitement of potential discovery outweighed the pervasive dread. The first few tunnels were nearly featureless, long and vacant, their walls splattered with the decay of time. His flashlight beam danced across dusty benches, shattered glass, and a scattering of old newspapers proclaiming local tragedies. As he moved deeper, a subtle change began. The silence became punctuated by faint sounds, a dripping echo that did not quite sync with the rhythm of his own heartbeat, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. At one bend in the tunnel, Marcus paused before a set of heavy iron doors, their surface engraved with enigmatic symbols he hadn't seen before. The door's surface was cold, slick with condensation, and a twinge of anxiety shot through him as he pushed it open. Beyond lay a chamber he later learned once served as a wartime shelter. The remnants of hastily abandoned belongings, tattered blankets, rusted metal trunks, personal letters stained with tears, littered the floor. In the center of the room, illuminated by the weak beam of his light, stood an old wooden desk beside a battered radio equipment panel. As Marcus approached the desk, his recorder crackled to life with static, soon followed by the disembodied sounds of muffled voices and snatches of conversation he could barely decipher. He hesitated, heart pounding, as he listened. The voices, full of sorrow and latent menace, repeated a single phrase over and over. "Remember, all will be forgotten unless you confess." Marcus frowned and flipped through his notebook. The phrase was not found in any of the historical documents he'd researched, yet it seemed to resonate with an almost ancient timbre. He pressed the record button to capture the phenomenon, though his rational mind screamed that it was impossible for electronics to pick up ghosts. The voices continued in the static, rising slowly into a near hymn that filled the room with aching despair. Then came a sudden whisper, clearer than before. "Marcus, you have seen too much." The voice was low and deliberate, a blend of warning and beckoning. Swallowing hard, he called out, "Who's there?" His voice echoed, swallowed by the darkness around him. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the lights in the corridor flickered and died, plunging him into almost total darkness. Unable to rely on his failing flashlight, Marcus fumbled for his backup, his breaths short and rapid. In the pitch black, his other senses sharpened. The chilling sound of footsteps, deliberate and measured, approached from behind. Panic clawed at him as he spun around, raising his trembling hand in a defensive gesture. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged, a gaunt man in a threadbare uniform with eyes that shone not with malice but with profound sorrow. His features were blurred, as if he were partly made of mist, yet there was an undeniable humanity in his expression. "Why do you disturb this place?" the spectral man asked, his tone measured and heavy with regret. Marcus managed a halting reply. I'm looking for the truth. I want to document what happened here." The apparition's gaze softened for just a heartbeat before darkening. "This is not a place for the living to seek answers," he murmured. "The truth here is burdened with agony and guilt, secrets that have festered for decades. You must leave, for every inquiry exacts a price in sorrow." His voice held a melancholic resonance that unsettled Marcus more than the threat of violence. Determined yet unnerved, Marcus pressed on, asking, "What do you mean? What happened here?" The Phantom's eyes drifted toward the shattered remnants of the desk, his voice growing quieter as if weighed by memory. "In this shelter, in these very tunnels, countless souls were hidden away during the war. A desperate measure to save lives, but when the regime fell and the truth of their abandonment emerged, we were condemned. Our voices were silenced, our suffering buried beneath layers of repression and shame." He paused, allowing the echo of his words to seep into the crumbling walls. "And now we linger in the dark, condemned to recount our tragedies over and over, unless our misdeeds are acknowledged." Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. "Misdeeds? What do you mean?" he repeated, desperation edging his tone. The specter's head tilted sorrowfully. "Not just the cruelty inflicted upon us by the powers that be, but also what we did to one another, driven by fear and despair. Our confessions have been withheld by time, and with each secret left unspoken, the shadow grows longer. The voices you heard, they are the voices of the forgotten, demanding restitution, demanding to be remembered." As the apparition's words sank in, a cold draft swept over Marcus, stirring the papers on the desk and carrying with it the acrid scent of smoke and decay. The stale air seemed to vibrate with whispered pleas. In that moment, his eyes caught something on the wall opposite, a series of hastily scrawled words. "Only by facing the past can we ever be free." Chills ran down his spine. Marcus knew that whatever energy resided in these depths was not merely the residue of human tragedy. It was something almost sentient, a malignant force fed by unacknowledged guilt and relentless sorrow. Taking a shaky breath, he vowed to unearth the dark confessions that haunted this space. I will record your story," he stuttered, his voice a mix of terror and resolve. "I promise I won't let your pain be forgotten." In response, the ghostly man inclined his head slightly, his once somber face flickering with a glimmer of faint, solemn hope. "Then come with me," he intoned. "There is one chamber deeper still, a hidden repository of our memories. There you will find the ledger of regrets, and only when its secrets are laid bare might there be a chance for absolution." With little choice but to trust this forlorn guide, Marcus followed him through a narrow passageway carved into the concrete wall. The tunnel spiraled downward, the walls moist with condensation and stained by the passage of uncounted years. The sound of his own footfalls merged with a low, continuous murmur that seemed to emanate from the very rock itself, a constant litany of lamentation. The further he went, the heavier the atmosphere grew, as though the weight of centuries pressed down upon him. At last, they arrived at a sealed iron door embedded in the back of the tunnel. The ghost pressed an ethereal hand against it, and with a groan that sounded like a final, sorrowful farewell, the door creaked open. Inside was a cramped room lit by a single, flickering fluorescent bulb that battled the encroaching darkness. Dust swirled in the weak light, and on a rickety metal table lay an ancient leather-bound ledger, its pages brittle and yellowed with time. Marcus set his camera to record, his hands trembling uncontrollably as he approached the table. The specter gestured toward the ledger. "Here lie the confessions," he whispered. "Each page tells the story of our shared sins, of betrayals, of desperate acts committed in the name of survival. For decades, these words have been buried in silence, and their quiet mourning has nourished the darkness that now haunts these depths." With painstaking care, Marcus opened the ledger. The entries were written in looping, archaic script that chronicled the agony of unnamed souls. Some lines detailed inhumane orders that led to unspeakable cruelty during times of war. Others recounted personal regrets and shamed secrets of survival at the cost of one's humanity. As he read aloud, his voice seemed to carry the weight of more than his own terror. It resonated with the sorrow of those who had been long forgotten. At one entry, the script read, "Let the living witness our transgressions. so that our bound spirits might be released from eternal penance. Only truth spoken in anguish can shatter these chains. As soon as Marcus uttered those words, the room trembled imperceptibly. The fluorescent light flickered erratically, and the sound of distant, agonized wailing filled the chamber. His recorder picked up fragments of voices, pleading and mournful, as if every soul documented in the ledger was crying out for redemption. A sudden crash of metal echoed through the room, and the spectral guide's form wavered. "We are not free yet," the ghost said in a strained whisper, his voice barely audible over the swelling cacophony. "The ledger is but the beginning of our confession, Marcus. It binds our fates together, both yours and ours. To break the cycle of endless regret, you must speak the truth to the world so that our misdeeds may be acknowledged and our suffering absolved." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, the enormity of his task searing into his soul. He knew that what he was doing was dangerous, that dredging up these painful memories might draw him into an abyss of despair. But he also recognized that he was the only one who could give voice to the voiceless. His trembling fingers smoothed out the fragile pages, and he recorded every single confession with fervent urgency. Outside, the tunnel's oppressive grip seemed to recede slightly, as if the act of speaking truth was an offering against the consuming dark. The ghost's form, now steadier and less tormented, regarded Marcus with a look of bittersweet relief. "You have done what we have longed for," he whispered. "By acknowledging our sins, you have lit a spark of hope in this desolation. But remember, the truth is a burden never easily laid down. It will follow you, a constant companion in a world that often prefers blissful ignorance." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the weight of that warning settle in his bones. With renewed determination, he closed the ledger and, guided by the spectral presence, retraced his steps through the labyrinth of tunnels. Emerging into the chill night air above, the city's chaotic hum returned, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the underground. In the following weeks, Marcus's exposé shook the city to its core. His detailed account of the ledger, the tormented confessions, and the hidden horrors of the abandoned northern terminal captivated an audience that had long ignored the dark undercurrents of their shared history. His recordings and photographs were met with both acclaim and disbelief, igniting heated debates about the nature of guilt, memory, and the price of forgotten sins. For Marcus, however, the experience never ceased to haunt him. Late at night, when the city's neon glow dimmed and silence filled his apartment, he could still hear the faint voices of those imprisoned souls, whispers of sorrow, remorse, and the unyielding need for forgiveness. Their murmurs were a constant reminder that some truths were too heavy to be easily forgotten. Years later, Marcus's work became more than just a documentary. It evolved into a movement for remembrance. Public memorials were established at the sites of unspeakable tragedies, and the ledger's contents inspired countless individuals to confront their own buried guilt and sorrow. Yet, for every step toward redemption, there remained a lingering darkness beneath the city's concrete facade, a silent testament to the fact that the past never truly dies. As Marcus looked out over the city from his modest apartment window, he often recalled the cold, damp corridors of the northern terminal, the echoing wails, and the eyes of the forgotten pleading for justice. And in that quiet moment, as the wind carried the whispers of long-buried regrets, he vowed to continue his quest, to shine light into every corner of darkness so that no voice would ever be lost to silence again.
Story number 9.
Night had fallen over Havenwood, and beneath a swollen copper-toned sky, a blood-red moon ascended as if heralding an unspeakable event. In the depths of a long-forgotten field at the outskirts of town where cornfields bowed in the whispering wind, the Carnival of Whispers emerged from the shadows like a malignant specter. No one in Havenwood remembered its last appearance, nor had they ever welcomed its dark arrival. Yet now, a ragged sign creaked in the wind, its faded letters proclaiming Carnival of Whispers, as if beckoning the unwary to share in its doomed revelry. Ava Cole, a young librarian haunted by fragmented childhood memories and dreams of a place she refused to name, trudged along the lonely country road. The inexplicable pull of this cursed carnival had haunted her thoughts for weeks, a relentless whisper in her dreams, urging her to return to a scene of terror, long suppressed by time. Recently, cryptic postcards had arrived at her door, their messages scrawled in shaky ink and depicting a gaudy Ferris wheel spinning slowly under a stormy sky. "Remember," one read, "for the lost never escape." Unable to resist the lure of answers hidden in the past, Ava clutched the postcards tight and made her way to the field, where the carnival had materialized with an eerie inevitability. The closer she got, the more reality bent and blurred at its edges. An unnatural stillness wrapped the field like a shroud, punctured only by the scratch of a distant Calliope melody. Its tinkling notes, distorted and forlorn, drifted over the tall grasses. As Ava passed under a sagging, warped archway festooned with carnival banners, her pulse quickened. The colors were gaudy, garish purples, sickly greens, and bruised oranges, but they pulsed as if alive, flickering in the half-light in sync with the distant laughter that wasn't entirely human. Inside the carnival's ring, chaos and decay contended with an almost magnetic charm. Tattered tents, each sporting faded murals of smiling clowns and ghostly acrobats, lined a crooked midway. Rusted rides groaned, and muddy footprints led to unfamiliar attractions. At the far end of the midway, a dilapidated funhouse beckoned. Its broken windows revealed swirling shadows and hints of faces contorted in silent screams. Ava hesitated at the entrance, memories of whispered stories from her youth flooding back, hushed warnings from older neighbors that spoke of a carnival that came on stormy nights, a carnival that preyed on those with secrets in their hearts. In the distance, a gaunt man in a threadbare suit, his eyes sunken and unnervingly vacant, stood beside a deflated balloon arch. His presence, both pitiful and ominous, sent a shiver down her spine. "You've come back," he said softly, his voice wavering between sorrow and menace. "They say a spirit lingers where memories are darkest." Ava's throat tightened as she stared at him, uncertain whether to flee or seek the truth he might offer. I received a postcard. It said to remember," she stammered, her voice barely audible amidst the eerie strains of music. The man's eyes, hollow yet reflective, regarded her for a long moment before responding. "You carry a heavy past, child. The carnival appears to claim those whose souls bear a great burden. Come," he beckoned with a bony hand. "Follow me to the Hall of Echoes. There you might hear what you have longed to remember." The Hall of Echoes was a marquee tent festooned with peeling silver paint and lopsided lettering that spelled out half-remembered names. Inside, the air was cool, and the silence was punctuated by low, murmuring voices. As Ava stepped across the creaking wooden floor, the doors shuttered behind her with a resounding thump. Candles set in iron sconces along the walls were the only light, their flames dancing as if in anticipation. The gaunt man withdrew a folded slip of paper from his coat and handed it to her. "This guide will show you the way," he murmured, "but be warned, the truth is not always gentle." Ava unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It was a map of the carnival, marked in spidery script and revealing paths leading to strange attractions. The funhouse of lost faces, the mirror of sins, the carousel of broken time, and the final tent. Each location bore an inscription warning of sorrow and sacrifice, hints of tragedies long concealed behind illusion and laughter. With a deep breath, determined to confront the buried secrets of her past, Ava stepped deeper into the tent. The first stop was the funhouse of lost faces. Inside, the reflections in the warped funhouse mirrors swirled and shifted unnaturally. Ava's own reflection appeared distorted, her face elongating and contorting as if threatened by unseen hands. As she wandered through the labyrinthine corridors, phantom figures materialized in the mirror's fleeting reflections. Grinning clowns with hollow eyes, weeping women draped in spectral veils, and children whose smiles betrayed a hidden agony. In one mirror, she saw her younger self, hair unkempt, eyes wide with terror, and behind that child lingered a shadow too tall to belong. A voice, both distant and familiar, echoed through the funhouse. "Remember, Ava, remember what was lost." Her heart pounded violently as she followed the disembodied whispers, each step drawing her deeper into the haunted maze. The air was thick with regret and sorrow, and every reflection seemed to demand confession. Amid the swirling images, she caught a glimpse of an old, crumpled photograph pinned to the wall. A snapshot of a young girl holding a red balloon, her eyes shining with both innocence and despair. Beneath the photograph lay a smudged date, one that matched the day her mother had vanished without explanation. A chill seized Ava's spine. Was the carnival calling her to face a secret she had long buried? When she emerged from the funhouse, her breaths came in ragged gasps, her eyes brimming with tears. The gaunt man awaited her outside the tent, his expression unreadable. "You have seen a shard of your past. Past," he intoned softly. "The mirror of sins awaits you next." Though fear tugged at her every instinct to turn back, Ava pressed on, compelled by the need to know and the hope that hidden within these cursed attractions lay the redemption to her pain. The corridor leading to the mirror of sins was narrow and oppressive, its walls lined with velvet drapes stained in dark, indecipherable marks. Ava's heart hammered as she entered a circular chamber in which the centerpiece, a towering mirror framed in black iron, stood motionless. The inscription on its frame read, "Only in the reflection of truth may the soul be freed." Gathering her courage, Ava approached and peered into the glass. At first, she saw only herself, a figure etched with grief and uncertainty. But as she watched, her reflection began to change. Shadows peeled away from her eyes, revealing moments of hidden guilt, fleeting sins of omission, and choices made in desperation. Faces of those she had lost, of those whose lives she felt responsible for in some way, swirled around her reflection, their eyes accusing yet pleading. "Why do you hide your truth?" A voice resonated from within the mirror, a voice that echoed with the collective pain of the past. "Will you not remember that every secret we bury weakens the spirit?" Ava's hands shook as she raised them, as if to touch the spectral visages. Tears streamed down her face as the mirror imparted its curse. That unspoken remorse could never be laid to rest until it was confronted head-on. Every image that passed before her eyes, a betrayal, a misdeed, a moment of crushing inaction, stung her with the raw pain of memory. In that moment, she realized that the carnival was no mere spectacle of horrors, but a purgatory where souls, both living and dead, were forced to confront the sins that haunted them. Shaken but resolute, Ava murmured an apology into the silence, voicing long-forgotten confessions that tumbled from the depths of her heart. As she spoke, the mirror's images softened, and the ghostly figures seemed to bow their heads in reluctant forgiveness. When silence finally reclaimed the chamber, she felt an uncanny lightness, for a moment, like a weight being lifted from her soul. Her journey did not end at the mirror, however. The map in her hand urged her onward, leading her to the Carousel of Broken Time, a rickety, abandoned ride that creaked with every gust of wind. The carousel was draped in cobwebs, its painted horses faded yet poised in eternal mid-gallop. The air around it vibrated with the faded echoes of laughter and the soft strains of an old Calliope tune. As Ava stepped onto the creaking platform, she sensed that the carousel itself was an altar to time lost and opportunities squandered. Each rotation revealed fleeting scenes from her past, a birthday party where her laughter had been the brightest note, a farewell at a train station, an unanswered call in a midnight haze. In the soft, surreal glow of the carousel, she confronted the moments that had defined her sorrow and regret. The ride's motion was slow, deliberate, a ritual meant to force time to reveal its long-held secrets. With every rotation, Ava felt herself drifting closer to the edge of despair, and also closer to the possibility of absolution. Finally, as the night deepened and the carnival's other attractions faded into the distance, Ava was drawn to the final tent. The marquee was grander than the rest, a tattered yet imposing structure that loomed at the very heart of the carnival. Its entrance was guarded by two grim-faced silhouettes whose eyes glowed faintly in the dark. The gaunt man from earlier reappeared beside her, his voice now somber and imbued with finality. "This is where the carnival's curse culminates," he said. "Within you must face the true architect of these sorrows, the keeper of memories. Only by confronting him can you hope to break the chains that bind these lost souls, including your own." Inside the final tent, the atmosphere was oppressively still, the air charged with a potent mix of hope and dread. A single spotlight illuminated a raised dais at the center, where a figure in a tattered cloak sat motionless. His face was hidden in the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but there was an unmistakable gravity about him, a presence that seemed to command both reverence and terror. As Ava approached, the keeper slowly lifted his head. His eyes glimmered with ancient sorrow and a hint of bitterness. "Why do you disturb our eternal vigil?" he asked, his voice resonant as though spoken by an age-old wind across barren moors. Ava's throat constricted, but she stood firm and responded, "I came seeking the truth of my past, to understand the darkness that has haunted me, and to free not only myself but those whose voices have been silenced." The keeper regarded her in silence for a lingering moment, as if measuring the depth of her resolve. Finally, he spoke. "The pain of the past is a chain that binds us, forged in the fires of regret and kept alight by unconfessed transgressions. To break that chain, you must speak the full truth, even if it shatters the illusions that have kept you safe. Only when every stolen moment, every hidden sorrow is laid bare, can the curse be lifted." In the dim glow of the final tent, surrounded by the quiet witnesses of the carnival's lingering specters, Ava felt the full force of her burdens rise. With a trembling voice, she began to recount every shameful secret, every moment of cowardice and misplaced pride, every guilt that had festered in the corners of her heart. Her confession was raw and unfiltered, a tapestry of pain woven with threads of regret, remorse, and a desperate longing for absolution. The tent seemed to pulse with her every word. The air grew thick, and the surrounding figures leaned in as if the very essence of time had stopped to listen. When Ava reached the final word of her truth, a heavy silence descended. The keeper's face broke into a sorrowful smile, as if in that final moment of vulnerability, centuries of anguish were forgiven. "You have done well," he said softly. "The curse that has bound these souls and you is now shattered by the force of your truth." The gaunt man beside her nodded slowly, his hollow eyes now filled with a spark of redemption. Outside, the carnival of whispers began to dissolve. The garish lights flickered and died, and the dilapidated tents and broken rides melted into the night as if they were never more than a waking nightmare. The Calliope's tune faded into an echo that hung for a moment longer in the cold air. With her confession still echoing inside her, Ava stepped out of the final tent and watched as the cursed carnival receded into the distance, leaving behind a field bathed in the gentle light of a new dawn. In the quiet hours before sunrise, Ava felt a profound calm settle over her, a fragile, hard-won peace that was the promise of redemption. She knew that the memories of sorrow might always linger in the recesses of her heart. But now, they were tempered by the knowledge that truth and confession had the power to set even the most tormented souls free. As she walked back along the once-trodden road toward Havenwood, the remnants of the carnival faded into mist and memory, never to terrorize the living again. And somewhere, deep in the forgotten corners of that mysterious field, the echoes of the Carnival of Whispers, its lost souls, its broken dreams, dissipated into the night, leaving behind only the quiet promise that even in the darkest moments, a spark of truth can illuminate the path to salvation.
Story number 10.
The rain had subsided to a sullen mist as Alex Mercer drove the lonely back road winding up the mountain toward the old Strathmore radio station. A lifelong radio enthusiast with an inquisitive mind and a taste for the strange, Alex had spent countless nights scanning frequencies for signals that defied explanation. Recently, faint transmissions, ghostly murmurs punctuated by bursts of static and half-formed phrases, had drawn him into a mystery that defied rational explanation. The reports from other listeners were sparse and contradictory, yet every account hinted at one inescapable truth. Something unknown was broadcasting from deep within the abandoned station on Mount Larkspur. When Alex pulled into the gravel lot, the station's imposing silhouette cut a forlorn figure against the slate-gray sky. Ivy and tangled vines coiled around the stone facade, and broken windows stared out like blind, vacant eyes. The building, shuttered since the station was forcibly closed decades ago after a series of inexplicable incidents, exuded an aura of heavy melancholy and unspoken secrets. Alex parked his car and grabbed his duffel bag, which contained a compact digital recorder, a multi-band radio transceiver, and a notebook filled with cryptic observations. With a deep breath that tasted like apprehension and anticipation, he pressed forward toward the main door. Inside, the air was cold and thick with dust. His footsteps echoed on the worn marble floor as he made his way into what once had been the broadcasting room, a vast hall lined with rows of outdated equipment now cloaked in rust and decay. Flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows across abandoned consoles and tangled wires. In one corner, a large analog transmission switchboard still loomed, its dials frozen in time. Alex's pulse quickened. Had the strange signals been produced by the old machinery coming alive on its own, or was there something else at work here? He set his recorder on a battered desk and began scanning the room with a flashlight. Every surface told a story of sudden abandonment. of days when frantic voices and urgent instructions had once filled these halls before silence overcame them. He flipped open his notebook and scribbled his initial impressions. Strathmore Station, deserted but oddly resonant. Echoes of voices that do not belong here. Must record ambient sounds. Alex connected his portable transceiver to a power source that still hummed faintly in the background, a stubborn spark of life amid the desolation. As he tuned into the frequency the whispers had been occupying, a low, nearly imperceptible murmur began to rise from the static. At first, it was just background noise, a distant chorus blending with the hum of electrical remnants. But as he adjusted the dials with careful deliberation, a voice layered and disjointed emerged from the noise. No escape. The night remembers. Alex's fingers trembled slightly as he recorded the transmission. The voice was gentle, yet laced with a profound despair that sent shivers down his spine. He isolated the segment, rewound it on his portable recorder, and listened to it repeatedly. Each playback revealed snippets of words that grew increasingly coherent, a fragmented litany of regret, warnings, and sorrow. "Is someone there?" Alex asked into the silent room. His voice was swallowed by the cavernous space, its echo mingling with the fading transmission. For a long moment, nothing answered but the pervasive static and the rhythmic drip of unseen water. Determined to follow the thread, Alex methodically made his way deeper into the station. The corridors were narrow and shrouded in shadow. The walls were lined with peeling murals depicting long-forgotten radio personalities and outdated logos, testaments to the station's once thriving existence. At each bend, his flashlight beam caught fleeting impressions of movement. Was it merely the swaying of old drapes, or was something else moving in the darkness? He reached a heavy wooden door marked "Control Room" in faded gold lettering. Gathering his courage, he pushed it open. The room beyond was even more dilapidated than the rest of the building. Banks of analog equipment lay dormant, and a large glass-paneled wall offered a view of the overgrown courtyard below, where wild ivy choked the fountain that once served as the station's pride. As Alex stepped inside, his flashlight caught sight of a large chalkboard filled with cryptic scribblings, equations, dates, and symbols intermingled with phrases like "the signal speaks" and "unspeakable remorse." He leaned closer, tracing the scrawled lines with a trembling finger, when the board suddenly rattled as though set off by an unseen breeze. A low whisper seemed to emanate from behind him, too soft to understand clearly, but laden with an emotion that was both pleading and mournful. "Alex, remember." He spun around, his heart hammering in his chest. For a fleeting moment, he swore he saw the shape of a man, a gaunt, indistinct figure with hollow eyes standing in the far corner of the control room. The figure dissolved into the shadows as soon as he tried to focus, leaving only a resonant echo of that single word, "remember." Unsure if his mind was conjuring phantoms, Alex steadied himself. "I'm here to listen," he spoke into the darkness, voice strong despite the dread seeping into his bones. There was no reply, only silence and the buzz of failing lights. Resolute, Alex continued his exploration to a corridor leading to an archive room, where dusty filing cabinets and stacks of battered logs lay forgotten. Among the yellowed pages, he uncovered a faded logbook dated back to the early 1970s. It detailed routine broadcasts and equipment maintenance, but the final pages spoke of inexplicable events. One entry, scrawled hastily in red ink, read, "The voices grew louder. It is as if the night itself speaks, accusing us of sins long past. I fear the signal has become a vessel for something beyond our understanding." Alex's hands shook as he read the passage. He could almost feel the oppressive weight of regret and despair emanating from the pages. Before he could close the logbook, he heard it, a sudden, sharp thump from the corridor behind him. Dropping the book, he rushed back to the main control room. His transceiver now emitted a regular, staccato pulse as though trying to communicate in a desperate rhythm. "Who's there?" he demanded again, voice cracking under the strain of mounting terror. This time, the reply came swiftly, a voice, distinct and sorrowful, not through the static, but as if spoken directly into his ear. "You have come to witness our penance, and in doing so, you will share our burden." Alex's blood turned to ice. The voice was intimate, as if it knew him personally. "What burden?" he stammered, stepping back as a chill swept over him. In the reflective surface of a broken monitor, he caught a glimpse of movement, a figure slowly emerging from the shadows behind him. This was no trick of the light. The figure was real, and it exuded an aura of profound grief mixed with warning. The spectral form was that of a man in a tattered suit, his eyes vacant, yet shimmering with a flicker of remorse. "My name is Edward," the apparition said. "I was once the chief engineer of Strathmore Radio, entrusted with voices that transcended mortal bounds. But I made a choice, one that bound me and all who listened to this cursed frequency. Every night we repeat our confession in hopes that truth might one day release us. Instead, we are left to wander, echoing our own guilt." Alex felt the urge to flee, but his feet were cemented to the spot. "What did you do?" he managed, voice barely a whisper. Edward's figure seemed to sag with an unbearable sorrow. "We dared to broadcast messages meant for the beyond. In our arrogance, we channeled something that was never meant to be heard by the living. The energy we summoned, our collective regrets, our hidden transgressions, became a beacon for that which thrives in darkness. Since then, the voice on the air grew into a lament, a relentless penance that condemns us all." His words seeped into the room like a toxic fog. As Edward spoke, the control room lights flickered violently, and an almost imperceptible vibration pulsed through the floor. The transceiver sputtered erratically, and for a moment, the room was filled with the unmistakable sound of a heartbeat, an erratic, pounding throb that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Alex clutched the edges of a rickety table, his mind battling between disbelief and terror. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, voice quivering. "Why do I feel drawn to this misery?" Edward's translucent eyes darkened. "Because you, like us, have known loss, the call of the unknown, the pull of regret. It finds those who have suffered. You are chosen now to be the bearer of our truth. With every word you record, you renew our promise that our misdeeds will not vanish into oblivion. It is a burden, yes, but one that must be borne so that we might seek redemption." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the droning static from the radio. Alex's rational mind reeled. The idea that an entire broadcast, a station once filled with the laughter of dedicated workers and the clamor of live shows, could become a prison of haunted confessions was almost too much to bear. Yet, the evidence was all around him. The logbook, the drifting whispers in the corridors, and now Edward's spectral presence. Struggling to steady his shaking hands, Alex retrieved his digital recorder and began documenting Edward's story. "Tell me everything," he said, voice low. "I need to understand what happened here." Edward's form flickered as if caught in a shifting breeze. "We were a community of voices, united by our passion for the airwaves. Late one fateful night, as a fierce storm raged overhead, we experimented with a frequency that we believed could transcend the boundaries of life and death. We transmitted messages intended for our loved ones lost in combat, for souls yearning to be reunited. But something went terribly wrong. The signal did not return the love we expected. Instead, it brought back echoes of guilt, of dark secrets once hidden. It awakened a presence that lurks just beyond the veil, feeding on our unresolved regrets." The air in the room grew colder still, and Alex's breath came out in visible puffs. "And what happened to you?" he inquired, more to himself than to Edward. A profound sadness emanated from Edward as he whispered, "I tried to stop it. I tried to sever the link, but the more I resisted, the deeper the call grew. I became entwined in the very lament I sought to silence. Now I am doomed to wander these halls, repeating our confessions in the hope that one day someone will listen and perhaps bring us peace." Outside the control room, the low murmur of the mysterious broadcast had grown louder, swelling into a chorus of voices that layered themselves upon one another. Each voice carried a personal sorrow, a cry for forgiveness, a plea for remembrance. The sound, a mix of agonized confessions and plaintive regrets, vibrated through the stale air. Alex's recorder captured every nuance, every broken syllable of that spectral litany. Torn between terror and duty, Alex realized that he had become an unwitting medium. The station's haunted frequency was now his burden as well. With a final resolve, he whispered, "I promise I will not let your voices fade into silence. I will carry your story out into the light." In that instant, the lights in the control room steadied, and the cacophony of voices receded into a sorrowful murmur that seemed to ebb with the tide. Edward's expression softened, a glimmer of relief mingling with the ever-present pain in his eyes. "Then go, and tell our truth," he murmured. "But know that the past never dies, it lingers, a shadow in every whisper of the wind, and you, Alex Mercer, are now forever a part of our penance." With trembling hands, Alex gathered his equipment, taking one final look at the control room, a sanctum of haunted memories. He left the station in the pre-dawn gloom, the building's silhouette receding into the mists as if reluctant to surrender its dark secrets. Back in his car, as he drove down the winding mountain road back to civilization, the distant static of the cursed frequency continued to echo in his mind. The recorder's last notes played softly against the hum of the engine, a testament to a night when the voices of the long dead found a vessel in a lonely seeker. In the months that followed, Alex's detailed exposé of Strathmore radio station sent ripples through the community of paranormal enthusiasts and skeptics alike. His recordings, photographs, and meticulously transcribed log entries drew both acclaim and condemnation. Some dismissed his work as the ravings of a man touched by the madness of isolation, while others insisted that his evidence was undeniable, a chronicle of a spectral penance that had spanned decades. Yet for Alex, the true cost was measured in quiet moments of solitude. Late at night, when he sat in a modest apartment on the edge of the city, and the familiar hum of urban life lulled him towards sleep, he would sometimes awaken to the soft, unceasing murmur of voices, the residual echoes of the station calling to him from beyond. In those moments, the burden of his promise and the sorrow of countless forgotten souls pressed upon him like a heavy shroud. Alex understood now that some mysteries are eternal, that the past, with its regrets and unconfessed sins, will always haunt the fringes of our lives. Though his journey had granted him a deeper understanding of redemption through remembrance, it had also entwined his fate irrevocably with the spectral legacy of Strathmore radio station. And as he continued his work, chronicling the blurred boundary between man and memory, he carried with him the solemn vow to keep their confessions alive, so that no voice, no matter how tormented, would ever be lost in the silence of oblivion.